Noticing that the most noble Empress Renisha was crying, the emperor asked for an explanation. He is ready to do anything, just not to see tears on the face of his beloved wife. Lexus is convinced that the heads of people executed for crimes do not evoke compassion or pity. However, if she has any connection to the traitors, he asks her to admit it right now. It's worth looking closely. Perhaps the face of one of them will seem familiar. Through their eternal stupidity, they lost an important battle, putting the imperial family at risk. Having received no answer, Lexus decides to ask again if Renisha has anything to do with these people. He wants the girl to give up her family with her answer, saving her life. But the main question is there any meaning in a life saved at such a high price? The emperor was always known for his cruelty, which he showed to those closest to him. But he cannot be allowed to win, otherwise revenge will remain an unrealizable dream of the Empress. Perhaps some of her loved ones managed to escape and she will soon be able to find survivors. Renisha states that the murdered people have nothing to do with her, she is seeing their faces for the first time. In response, Lexus allows her to rest a little today, she looks too tired. And yet it's funny that the girl so easily rejects the people who raised her from an early age. Since the time of the first emperor, they laid the foundations of the future empire. It was the Lotera family that brought the Hientri Empire to prosperity, but ended their journey tragically. In the distant past, Prince Laxus was an ordinary bastard and had no influence among the family members. Because of the opposition, he found himself on the brink of death, barely escaping a cruel fate. At some point, he decided that this was the end and that the mercenaries would now finish their job. At the last second before his death, the boy heard a voice that he remembered for the rest of his life. Members of the Lotera family knew about the impending assassination attempt and arrived there in time with an army. Prince Lexus's life was saved, and the criminals were executed by special order of the emperor. After some time, Lotera made him the next emperor, hoping that he would not forget the kindness shown. Thus Renisha, the daughter of Duke Lothair, becomes the wife of Emperor Lexus. The people of the empire expected a bright future and changes that would make life better. But Emperor Lexus's thoughts were completely different, as every resident later learned. Those closest to him were the first to know about this after Lexus ascended the throne. It's hard to believe that the Lothar family managed to turn a bastard into a real ruler. At first, he really did seem like a devoted leader and a loving husband. But even then, Lexus was irritated that someone had the power to grant the title of emperor to anyone. A year later, life in the imperial palace changes completely, as does life throughout the empire. On this day, Lexus summoned Duke Lothair, although he had never distracted him from his work before. The Duke greets His Majesty, deciding that the conversation will not drag on too long. He decides to dispense with formalities, declaring that he intends to return the Chorpa Plains to his possessions. In other words, their agreement to transfer the lands to the Lotera family's ownership is completely terminated. Lexus plans to start a war with the Parison kingdom soon, and the plain will become a staging ground. As is known, the imperial family's treasury cannot bear such expenses, and the Lotera family does not need money. At the end of the conversation, he announces that all the lands of Lothair are now in the possession of the emperor. In return, the Duke promises to make sacrifices if the empire suffers damage during the war. These were exactly the words he expected from his subordinate. The Duke was a smart fellow. Having issued a decree, the young emperor sends his best troops on campaign, including Lothair's army. They say that he did not provide any support in this war, and only aristocrats donated money. Many did not understand why Lexus would start a war, since the empire was currently at a disadvantage. Whenever someone spoke of the emperor's madness, there were people ready to support Lexus. Only those who did not participate in the war itself or in financing the imperial army were lucky. True, there weren't many of them, and the members of the Renishi family themselves stood in the front rows. Every day she prayed for them to return home safe and sound. However, despite her prayers for peace and prosperity in the empire, the war dragged on for 8 years. With each passing year, Lexus became more and more of a tyrant, arranging executions for any reason. He did not spare even those who had been loyal to him since his early days. It got to the point that the Empress had to take over management of the economy and diplomacy. But the reward for their help was the severed heads of Renisha's parents. For a long time after that night, the girl could not look at this world and spent whole days without getting out of bed. The servants ask her to say at least a word, hoping that she has not fallen ill with a fatal disease. The maid asks not to overexert herself too much. She is needed by the empire and all its inhabitants. In response, Renisha claims that she is fine and there is no need to worry so much about her health. She demands to know where the bodies of her murdered parents were dumped and who carried out the criminal order. Hearing this, the maids seem to lose the power of speech, not daring to answer the Empress's question. The head of the ladies-in-waiting asks to be given the floor if she wishes to hear her personal opinion. Linda is sure that they must be in the underground prison with the rest of the traitors. It is known that the underground prison is guarded more carefully than a prison because dangerous criminals are kept there. Even after death, they remain in the hands of the scoundrel to whom these people themselves presented the throne. Instead of gratitude, Lexus used family support to eliminate his own brothers. His whole life was built at Lothar's expense. No one thought that the Emperor was such a heartless creature. However, she clearly understands that it is too early to die right now. Lexus has not yet received revenge. Someday Renisha will strangle the bastard with her own hands, but until then, she will have to live with him under the same roof. If she has to sacrifice everything for the sake of revenge, she is ready to take her last step. This may lead to death, but there is far more honor in such a death than in life next to the Emperor. Meanwhile, Lexus is having fun with his mistress, spending time away from the hustle and bustle of the world. However, his thoughts are still elsewhere. He understands who the true ruler is. Every time I look at Renisha, I get the feeling that she was born to play the role of Empress. Renisha Lotera is more regal than the young Emperor himself as soon as she appears in the throne room. He wanted to disturb her nobility, believing that he would like the pitiful look of this proud girl. At this moment, Canaria realizes that Lexus is thinking about another woman, although he does not admit it. He promised that one day he would kill the Empress and put his new lover in her place. Lexus swore his love to this girl many times, and she simply believed every word. In response, he asks never to talk about this, and it would be better to simply not interfere in his personal affairs. It's scary to imagine what he's ready to do to his mistress if she decides to contradict the head of the empire. Right now, he cannot kill the Empress, otherwise he will turn her allies against him. The next day, a merchant from the Land of Deserts personally arrives at the Imperial Palace. He wishes to give Her Majesty silk, because dresses made from this fabric will further enhance her charming image. Lexus asks to repeat this again, believing that with these words the merchant called the Empress ugly. In response, the man asks for forgiveness, but he didn't mean anything like that at all. Realizing that another unnecessary conflict is looming, Renisha assures her husband that she is not offended. In this case, the merchant should hand over the silk right away to assess its quality. This silk is rightly considered their best product, but the Emperor treats it too carelessly. He throws it on the floor, as if he wants to walk across it to the other end of the throne room. It is a little strange to watch this, although the merchant does not dare to contradict His Highness. Taking the edge of the silk cloth, Lexus asks the Empress to come a little closer. A second later, he wraps Renisha in elegant silk, but this does not add any grace to her image. Now Lexus is confident that his wife looks more beautiful, wrapped from head to toe in expensive fabric. This is not what the merchant had in mind when he offered to sew a beautiful dress for Her Highness. Lexus demands to know if he still thinks the Empress is not beautiful enough. At this moment, the servant asks the Emperor to let Cassius in. He has been waiting at the door for a long time. We'll have to put off communicating with the foreign representative for a while. They'll return to this later. Having heard the invitation to an audience, a man whose name is known to everyone appears in the hall. He had long since earned the respect of the Empire's inhabitants by bravely fighting its enemies. This man once helped the Emperor secure his position on the throne. Cassius fought in the very war that brought victory and glory to the young Emperor Lexus. Having paid his respects, he dedicates the victory to His Majesty, swearing to serve the great ruler. The truth is that his face is well known not only to Lexus, but also to the Empress. Renisha knows very well that he was involved in the murder of his parents, although he did not do it personally. The commander's fate was quite difficult, something he prefers to forget forever. Suddenly, Lexus asks him the same question, wanting to know Cassius's opinion about his wife's appearance. Looking into his eyes, Renisha seemed to direct the correct answer into his thoughts. It's strange, but he says word for word exactly what His Majesty wants to hear. Lexus is very glad that there is at least one person in this place who likes her image. Previously, he was indifferent to the hero who saved the country, but now the Emperor wants to bestow a reward. He orders them to go back and wait until the commander is called to present the award. Coming closer, Lexus demands that he always remain a faithful dog, obeying every word. Such words are quite difficult to hear for a person who has been through a real war. Even then, Cassius began to understand that the Emperor had completely gone mad. He really does behave like a humiliated bastard who has been given the opportunity to take revenge on the whole world. Therion heard nothing new, except that Lexus had decided to wrap his wife in silk fabric. In the current situation, all their efforts will be in vain. They need to act more decisively. Cassius understands that among the Emperor's closest people, there are those who are hostile. He asks his assistant to name the Empress. Perhaps she will become their new ally. This sounds a bit strange, since Renisha Lotera didn't give any signals at all. Hearing the name, he suddenly realizes how close his connection with the young Empress is. If she really is the daughter of Duke Lothair, then Lexus got rid of his wife's parents. Cassius had always admired this man, having first met such a noble knight. As his subordinate, Cassius warned that the Emperor had deliberately sent him to his death. Instead of following the order, he offers to cut off the Emperor's head with this sword. However, he thought differently, because there are things in the world that cannot be done just by one's own desire. The Duke's daughter is in the hands of Lexus. He cannot exchange his life for Renisha's. Duke Lothair asked me to tell his daughter that her father fought with dignity for the family's honor. If Cassius ever meets her, he must convey his last message word for word. This explains a lot about the behavior of the young Empress. She is probably preparing a plan for revenge. In a palace full of lifeless eyes, only Renisha's gaze is truly alive. Upon learning of this, the assistant asks to explain what the main problem is. Today, during the reception, Lexus decided to declare that he was his faithful dog. A man worthy of admiration died in the war, and the Emperor continues to live as he pleases. His contemptuous face suggests that there is not a single person in the world worthy of compassion. Even the wife is a target for the Emperor, as the girl becomes more influential. Therion wants to understand what the commander is going to do without receiving any reward from Lexus. If this happens, the Emperor will have to pay with his miserable life. It must be said that Lexus's humiliating words to his commander were remembered by many courtiers. Renisha remembers the look her husband gave Cassius when he pronounced that vile order. Since he didn't kill her with his own hands, he must be planning to send Renisha to him. A former gladiator who started out as a slave, Cassius became a hero of the Great War. He seems to radiate vitality, shining like a blazing torch. Renisha intends to find a way to use this trump card to her advantage. If he were Lexus, he would assign him the most barren land, where eternal feuding takes place. But if this land turns out to be Hillstein, then further events will be a big surprise for Lexus. Having decided to act, she calls the servants who are always nearby. It seems that in the midst of the impenetrable darkness, she still manages to find one ray of hope. Once in the bathroom, the maids are ready to carry out any order of Her Majesty. In response, she asks to do something special, but it must be kept secret. When Renisha finishes dressing, she asks to invite the Chamberlain for a personal audience. That same day, Lexus spends time with Canaria again, having long forgotten about his legal wife. Canaria wants to know what makes him as cheerful as the Emperor was today. He claims to have found a way to get rid of the Empress in the most pitiful way. Canaria will probably be interested to see how her proud face will change. It's strange that he is so obsessed with the idea of tormenting his own wife. Lexus could have simply killed her, as he usually does with unwanted people. To prevent this man from turning his sword in her direction, Lexus should be given an heir as soon as possible. She admits that she has absolutely no idea what is going on in her master's head. Canaria advises not to think too long, otherwise there will be no time for the most important things. The main thing is to make her happy, because the Emperor does an excellent job of that. Meanwhile, the maid brings the Chamberlain to meet Her Majesty. Renisha called him to discuss an important matter, only he has the necessary information. She asks to answer what territory the Emperor plans to give Cassius as a reward for his service. Henry did not want to reveal His Majesty's secret, but he actually gives him Hillstein. As expected, he has no intention of properly rewarding the war hero who was once a slave. The award ceremony will take place immediately after Lexus officially inherits the title. For such an honest answer, Renisha will one day thank him accordingly. And now she asks to keep the conversation a secret from the Emperor. He doesn't need to know everything. After the parents entered the war, Hillstein became the property of the current Emperor. However, these lands previously belonged to her family and should belong to her by right. It is one of the most barren lands with a sparse population, but there is still a chance. To do this, the girl will have to personally go to Hillstein before they are given to Cassius. Even if she is stripped of her title of Empress, this girl's will never be broken. However, this scoundrel will not have an easy death, and Renisha intends to make sure of that. That same evening, a boisterous victory celebration takes place at Cassius's military camp. For a long time, soldiers did not have such a warm place to rest and have fun. The strong drinks went down especially smoothly, and the food seemed to be the most delicious the boys had ever tasted. Among the others, only Sir Cassius behaved with restraint, preferring to remain away from the company. There was a rumor that the emperor had promised him land and a title, but had not yet given a definitive answer. In his place, the fighter would have accepted the offer of a neighboring kingdom, which offered him the post of general. However, everyone knows what happens to Lexus's traitors when they fall into his hands. These conversations do not frighten Cassius at all. He has already seen a lot in his life. Therion asks the boys to be quiet, otherwise the commander might accidentally hear their words. What is more important is that if the emperor delays, another sacrifice will have to be made. Knowing this, the assistant decides to warn about one important fact. The number of knights in the imperial palace is no less than 500 people. It will take the whole day to convene. The news doesn't frighten him for the sake of a great cause. He can easily sacrifice one day. But if the knights refuse, they must make them pay for their fear of the emperor. He might have enjoyed the role of emperor if Lexus had stepped aside a little. It is known that the empress does not spend time with her husband, which means that Cassius is destined for a reward. If His Highness does not give his answer within a week, he proposes to go on the offensive. At that moment, he hears someone's voice, as if there was an urgent message for the commander. It was strange, but at such a late hour, a carriage arrived at the entrance, although no one was expecting guests. Only the imperial family would be so brazen as to allow themselves to pay an unannounced visit. However, if the empress herself has decided to have an audience, she must be accommodated immediately. Seeing Cassius, the chamberlain apologizes for disturbing him, but such was the emperor's order. His Majesty invited the commander to the imperial banquet. The event will take place in 3 days. The main question is whether Lexus has resolved the issue regarding Cassius's future holdings. Henry admits that he has no right to answer such questions. It is better to ask the emperor about it. The previous uniform will be unnecessary, so you just need to wear a regular dress suit. According to the chamberlain, His Majesty does not like anything that is contrary to propriety. Although everyone knows that he himself is a real rude person who does not know the boundaries of behavior. If you accept the invitation, Cassius will be able to see Renisha again during the ceremony. If he's lucky, he'll be able to convey the words he's been unable to tell the Empress for a long time. However, before setting conditions, Lexus could have given a little money for a dress suit. In the letter, he writes about it as if having a suit is the main thing that concerns him. Cassius barely has enough money to buy food, let alone clothes for one evening. Meanwhile, news of the upcoming imperial banquet spreads throughout the palace. Linda is not sure if Canaria will be present, but there are rumors that she is invited. Since the banquet was prepared by the emperor himself, Renisha cannot know all the details of the event. In other words, she really can show up brazenly, knowing that the empress is nearby. In response to such insolence, the maid suggests wearing a chic dress with gold threads. Suddenly, she offers to send an outfit for Sir Cassius, in which he can attend the banquet. She knows perfectly well that the expedition was organized at the commander's own expense. The pretext for celebration that Lexus is trying to create is too obvious. He intends to do the same thing as he did in his last meeting with this former gladiator. Certainly, the invitation could be seen as an attempt to connect Renisha and Sir Cassius. Meanwhile, the commander is doing his morning training, not wanting to lose his good form. Arriving to make an urgent report, Lulu announces the arrival of a guest at the military camp. If he doesn't want to miss the meeting, he should go to the meeting right now. However, before that, he needed to take a bath after all. He had spent the whole morning in the sun. Oddly enough, Count Fiesta decided to send a gift on behalf of his family, even though he had never provided assistance before. They sent a tailor from a boutique to sew the commander a new outfit for the imperial banquet. For some reason, the noble family decided to show the knight such kindness as if he had become a count. There was another strange thing. A woman came to visit the mansion. The problem is that they have nothing to treat their guest with, because there is nothing to serve at the table except cheap tea. One of them is seriously concerned for the honor of the camp and decides to personally take care of the refreshments. They are too prone to getting ahead of themselves, so the guy hopes for Lulu's help. All that is required of Cassius is the least. He just needs to wash himself before meeting the girl. After some time, he heads to the bathroom, continuing to think about what happened. Until the day his unit returned from the war, no one paid any special attention. But now everything has changed so abruptly, as if the emperor had a plan from the very beginning. Having completed his preparations, he goes out to meet the guest, meeting this stranger for the first time. The commander apologizes for the slight delay, but he wasn't expecting any guests today. Madame Turiel tells us not to worry about anything. She didn't expect the order either. As the owner of the boutique, the girl is obliged to personally oversee the fulfillment of orders from the highest nobility. This morning, the Empress's chief lady-in-waiting ordered a men's outfit especially for him. It is Empress Renisha who is the main customer of the costume that Cassius will wear to the banquet. Hearing this, Cassius asks to explain why the Empress shows such concern. The reason is unknown, but only Cassius himself can decide whether he is ready to accept this gift. Her Majesty chose the style of the suit herself, hoping that the commander would like it. Even after Duke Lothair's death, it seems as if the man continues to help his student. After thinking for a while, he agrees to accept the gift, which will be the beginning of a new acquaintance. At this moment, the assistant brings tea, trying to look like a real waiter. Moreover, Therion manages to get hold of a rare green tea, something that definitely wasn't available in the military camp. It's hard to remember the last time he was so helpful. The green hue may be intimidating, but Therion is a man you can trust. If you don't trust him, then there will be no one left in the world you can trust. After taking just one sip, he asks to take it back and never pour him poison again. Madame Turiel has a different opinion. Although it is a bit bitter, it is quite suitable for tea drinking. Looking at her unperturbed expression, Cassius realizes that the Empress's people are truly strange. In the evening, a guest also arrived at the Imperial Palace, but no one was prepared for her visit. While in her office, Renisha suddenly hears a loud female voice demanding an audience. This voice belongs to the very woman whom the Emperor chose as his mistress. She loudly explains to the servants that 2 identical dresses cannot be allowed at the banquet. This is even becoming interesting, so the Empress asks to let the capricious girl in here. There is nothing you can do if a person has never heard of education and good manners. After all, she has nothing to rely on except another woman's husband. With such a person, it is sometimes worth showing a little more compassion and understanding. Arriving at the office, Canaria meets a woman whose heart seems to be made of stone. She is sure that the loss of the Emperor's favor made her so heartless. You could probably watch Fire, Water, and the Hysteria of Unloved Ladies for an eternity. However, no one expects more from a woman whose value is determined by the birth of a child. The last phrase makes her even more nervous. Renisha knows her weaknesses. Canaria is sure that Renisha will soon be kicked out of the palace and she will take her place. But instead of empty threats, she advises thinking about the birth of an heir who still does not exist. In that case, what was she doing all this time when she was alone with His Majesty? Moreover, no one believes that Canaria is truly, sincerely in love with the cruel tyrant. She expected to see the Empress seething with humiliation after the banquet, but she met something completely different. Right now, Her Highness seems to be mocking the former servant who wiped her feet. In order to forget the grievances of the past, the girl even asked to change her name to any other. The name Jessica, which was there before, sounded too harsh and reminded me of humiliating work. This name was the root of her inferiority, and therefore unworthy of her current position. At that moment, the Emperor suggested calling himself Canaria. It sounds pretty good. Fortunately, the name was immediately liked, reminiscent of a bird with a beautiful song. And yet, having taken a beautiful name, Canaria's manners remained just as ugly and low. She suddenly declares that she is ready to share secret information only with the Empress. According to the girl, His Majesty the Emperor plans to send his wife into slavery to Cassius. Then Renisha will be dethroned and bound to a man born a slave. After hearing the secret of the century, the girl only adds that this is a terrible shame that cannot be survived. However, the stone woman continues to act as if this is nothing new to her. She decides to remind him that her rival will have to have the lowest status and live in barren lands. As a result, the entire palace had to listen to another hysteria from the strange guest. When she finally finishes, Renisha asks her to stop and not to start the conversation anymore. She thinks too much about the past, when Jessica had to wash her mistress's feet. It's quite unpleasant to hear your past name, especially from a hated woman. She demands that he never call her Jessica again. This name is forgotten like a bad dream. Renisha decides to remind that the lovely Canaria probably had her wings clipped. The poor canary has no idea what kind of ending awaits her in the Imperial Palace. Deprived of seeds and water, the canary will stop singing and will soon be forgotten by all who were dear to it. She will die alone, quietly living out her life far from the world and noisy holidays. After a short pause, Renisha asks to pour the guest a cup of fresh tea. This will lift her spirits. However, now the girl has no time for tea. She wants to leave the Empress's residence as soon as possible. Linda has known this young woman for a long time, but her habits have always raised many questions. She probably still hopes that she will one day be able to surpass her main rival. Arriving at the palace, Canaria was sure that she would be crushed by the Emperor's decision. But if you look at it differently, he himself gave the girl a second chance at a new life. Now Renisha herself is eagerly awaiting the outcome of the story of moving to Hillstein. 2 days later, Sir Cassius's suit was ready, and he began to look like a real nobleman. Madame Turiel even tried to teach him the etiquette that would be needed at the upcoming banquet. Cassius couldn't understand why this person continued to help him, even without knowing who he was. However, Her Majesty only asked for help once, which means she is obliged to do it. She really didn't want the commander to cause trouble for Renisha at an important moment. This moment will change a lot in their lives. They just need to do everything right. At the entrance to the hall, Cassius sees the familiar face of the chamberlain he has already been to the military camp. The second seat to the right of the main table belongs to him, although it is too early to sit down at the table. The young man understands perfectly well that the emperor does not treat him with such respect. However, if he invited his mistress to the banquet, he treats his wife no better. For some reason, Canaria is sure that the chair next to Lexis is prepared for her. She is already acquainted with the war hero who saved the empire from attacks by a neighboring country. From this moment on, she suggests being closer to each other without resorting to unnecessary formalities. In her opinion, their names are very similar, although the commander does not see any similarities. He explains that in the past, there lived an emperor named Cassius, and the central street is named after him. Canaria's name is associated with a common bird, so there is unlikely to be anything in common between them. Having said these words, he decides to take a seat further away, where they cannot chat for long. This is the first time the girl sees such arrogant behavior from the former slave. In this suit, he really does look like a wealthy nobleman, but his slavish habits are still preserved. Every day, the Empress's words sound more and more often in her head, but there is no turning back. At that moment, the atmosphere in the guest room changes dramatically, as if the main guest had visited this place. Her Majesty the Empress has always been graceful, but today she arrives in a different mood. Henry assures that she was not late at all, it was just that everyone else arrived a little earlier. Renisha asks the servants to remain in their places. There is no need for unnecessary ceremony. As they get closer, the scent of roses fills the air, causing Cassius to turn around. A vibrant, life-giving scent that tells you this woman is a true ruler. Renisha decides to start the conversation from afar, recalling her first meeting with the commander. Then he visited the imperial palace immediately after the campaign and was granted an audience. Leaning towards him, she makes a pleasant compliment about Sir Cassius's outfit. The words about the costume are a little confusing, since it was the Empress who paid for this order. Finally, the servant loudly announces the arrival of His Majesty the Emperor, asking the guests to rise from their seats. Having thanked the guests for their visit, Lexis intends to resolve an important issue that had been put off due to important matters. He knows how hard it has been for Sir Cassius, but his efforts will soon be rewarded. Having said these words, he approaches his mistress instead of greeting his wife. Lexis decides to kiss her in front of his guests, finally confirming her new status. Renisha continues to pretend not to notice her husband's little amusement. The Emperor acts as if everyone around him is his property. After kissing both women, he announces the beginning of today's event. Even knowing the man's habits, the commander could not imagine that everything would be so disgusting. Lexis thought that Cassius would say at least a few words, but he turned out to be terribly boring. Initially, this war was waged by House Lothair, and only later did everyone else join in. Therefore, as a reward for its completion, the Emperor grants Sir Cassius the Dukedom of Lothair. He must become the one who will cleanse this land of sins by killing traitors to the state. He is interested to know what the Empress thinks about this and whether she will accept this news. Noticing her agitation, Canaria asks not to delay His Majesty the Emperor with his answer. We must hurry, otherwise the head of the empire might take this silence for a small protest. Remaining the same unperturbed woman, Renisha begins to quietly applaud. It's hard to imagine how she manages to remain calm after such a vile insult. With a sweet smile on her face, the Empress congratulates Cassius, who has earned this award. She asks the servants to join her, otherwise this applause will sound too quiet. The servants immediately join their mistress, knowing that Renisha now needs support. In addition to the lands of Lothair, the lands of Hillstein and everything that is within their territory are granted. Looking at the two of them sitting side by side, Lexis decides to confess something else. They look like a perfect couple, as if the young people were made for each other. This was the last drop of patience, after which the commander could barely contain his anger. The emperor clearly mocks them, distributing lands to his subjects like useless junk. Having noticed a famous hero, the lady of the court wishes to meet him, asking for a minute. But this time he is not inclined to communicate with women, and besides, Renisha will not appreciate it. It is strange that lately he thinks so often about the Empress, although she is not his wife. It seems he went much further than he expected, causing a lot of unnecessary problems for himself. Someday the plan will be fulfilled, but for this you just need to try to survive. Even during the last meeting with the assistant, he asked not to jump to conclusions. To become a true nobleman, one must endure the barbs of the emperor and his court retinue. Therion promises to follow him throughout his life, and he must not forget the people who supported him. After such words, it is difficult to turn back, because together they have come a long way. One day everything will change, but until then you need to pretend to be an obedient watchdog. Cassius's home kingdom was destroyed and soon absorbed into Hilstein. He was born the heir to this kingdom, but eventually the boy was turned into a common slave. Along with the other children, he was kidnapped and sent to the estates. Only a few managed to escape. As the only surviving member of the royal family, Cassius is obligated to protect his people. For this purpose he must survive, otherwise the entire race will soon be completely destroyed. At that moment he again smells the familiar scent that he first smelled in the palace. Someone gently touches his hand, but without even turning around, the commander recognizes this person. It's incredible, but that subtle hint in the guest room could turn out to be quite serious. Having followed him, the Empress decides to leave the hall early, leaving the guests with her husband. Renisha herself heads to the garden, where Cassius went shortly after leaving the palace. Looking at him, the girl seems to be waiting for the first words, but all the necessary words seem to fly out of her head at once. All the humiliations at the hands of the emperor and his mistress will never be forgotten. It is difficult to understand her feelings for the commander, but the feeling of revenge towards his enemies is well known to him. Renisha apologizes if she scared the young man a little with her surveillance. However, the room became too boring after he hurried away. A moment later, she asks to borrow her handkerchief for a while, if Sir Cassius doesn't mind. On the way to the garden, something dirty got on my body, but I can't be in front of people like that. In fact, the scarf was needed as a pretext to start a difficult conversation. Still not understanding her motives, he continues to stubbornly remain silent, afraid to say too much. Using a handkerchief, she thanks the young man for his help. According to Renisha, he behaved quite politely at the banquet, although he was not used to social events. And yet, there is something important that the commander simply cannot know. For example, the girl has known his preferences for a long time, even to the point that the commander loves sweets. If required, the pastry chef can prepare special treats using a special recipe. During the last war, Cassius served under Duke Lothair, a fact his father often mentioned in his letters. The boy was described as brave, burning like a flame and full of life. This is exactly how she imagined him, although in real life Cassius is even better. These confessions make one think about something, although it is better to ask about it later. Everyone believes that Lothair was wiped off the face of the earth, but this is a lie spread by the emperor. Some of the family members are still alive, and she knows the whereabouts of her brother and niece. They must be found without Lexus knowing, otherwise he will do the same to them as to all the other victims. Cassius has no idea how cunning and cruel Lexus has become since ascending to the throne. Having heard the order, he wants to know the consequences of his refusal of this adventure. Renisha admits that if he refuses, the commander will lose his life, since only he knows about this secret. It sounds like a real threat, like she doesn't realize how much blood Cassius has seen. And yet, the elite knights of Lothair will carry out the order if they hear the command of the mistress. It's funny that after a romantic scene in the garden, she decides to set her dogs on him. The commander is forced to warn that some of the knights may not return home. If they really attack, Cassius will respond in kind, and even weapons won't save them from death. Doesn't she understand that after everything he's been through, he's not at all afraid of the court knights? Moreover, they served under the wing of Duke Lothair, who had served as his father figure in the past. The girl asks to relax. These knights are obliged to accompany her anywhere. Even near the Empress's chambers, there are always several faithful bodyguards. She may well give the order for them to remain outside the garden fence for a while. If he wants to talk alone, you can continue their romantic encounter. By the way, the lands of Hilstein, which will soon belong to Cassius, are not as simple as they seem. Few know, but this is a land of unknown gold, honey, and the blessings of the gods. By finding Lothar's remaining family, he will be able to repay the Duke's debt and fulfill his covenant. The commander still remembers the night when the Duke freed him from slavery forever. The boy brought what the Duke asked for, but the main reason for the meeting was different. Looking at Cassius, he understood that the young man was hiding the mark of a slave from everyone and was always in danger. His red hair always stood out from the others. It was as bright as a burning flame. It is rumored that he has a tattoo on his body, which is typical of extinct foreign kings. The young man's reaction confirms this, but right now no one except the Duke knows about it. At that moment he decided to free the boy from the stigma before the Emperor's men discovered him. It is better to endure the pain once, thus receiving a guarantee of safety. It's clear that he was scared, but a real man shouldn't be afraid of pain. He must endure this but not scream, otherwise the suffering will be useless. A second later, the Duke burns the tattoo off while he struggles to hold back a scream. From then on, he could move safely with the Duke's detachment without fear of being noticed. While Her Majesty is in such danger, he cannot leave her alone. However, there is no reason to refuse, since Lexus itself insists on granting land. That same evening, the assistant asks the Empress to complete another important task. She has already prepared invitation letters, which will soon be sent by messenger. After the imperial banquet, she must hold a tea party as required by secular custom. However, she intends to make her husband's mistress the main guest, if she agrees. Of course, Canaria will resist, but in the end she will accept the invitation. After all, the scoundrel wanted to disgrace Renisha in front of the servants. Now it was her turn. Changes in the empire have already begun, and only a blind person does not notice it. When she leaves the imperial palace, Renisha will determine who will follow her. The Empress reminds that it would be better for her to find a partner in advance for tea drinking. However, there is already a candidate for this role. It only remains to find out his opinion on this matter. On this day, she intends to wear a dress made of red fabric, embroidered with gold and silver threads. After listening to the lady's plan, Linda asks to explain why partners are needed for tea. The answer to this question is quite obvious. She wants to surprise her husband. True, it is not yet clear how Lexus, with its eternal malice, will react to this. Seeing Cassius there, he would probably guess that he and Renisha had become a little closer. Meanwhile, Lexus is once again hearing the pleas for mercy that he has heard hundreds of times. The poor guy insists that the mistake was completely accidental, but will never happen again. Such boring speeches get boring. First of all, he asks the guards to take the night away. The man understands that the matter will not be limited to simple imprisonment in prison. Getting rid of a man is quite easy, unless it concerns his own wife. For a long time, the Emperor has been hatching a plan on how to easily and quietly send her to her forefathers. However, now he could only send her to Hillstein, but that was already not bad. In those uninhabited lands, it will be much easier for mercenaries to do the dirty work. The servant apologizes for disturbing you, but an invitation was recently brought to the palace. Usually he knew about upcoming events in advance, but this envelope comes as a surprise. The servant claims that the invitation letter is addressed to Canaria, if the initials are to be believed. Grabbing the letter, the girl realizes that it is indeed addressed to her. Incredibly, in the letter, the Empress invites her to a tea party where noble guests will be present. For the first time in a long time, she was treated with respect, like a true lady-in-waiting. However, to be among the invited guests, she will definitely need a partner. In response, Lexus indifferently suggests doing as Canaria wishes. It is necessary to explain that if he refuses to become her partner, the girl will simply not be allowed to the tea party. Of course, he has a lot of work to do, but she insists that sometimes he needs a rest. Unexpectedly, Lexus offers her the candidacy of Sir Cassius as a partner, although she does not like him at all. Instead of looking for an excuse, Canaria asks to fulfill her request at least once. If you think about it, this event can be used to your advantage, banishing the Empress forever. For the first time in a long time, she actually came up with a great idea, worth trying. He agrees to go to the tea party, but the girl must strictly follow the plan. In the end, they recognize Renisha as a traitor to her husband, and Sir Cassius as a traitor to the Emperor. In this way, he will kill two birds with one stone, returning the donated lands. The next day, the assistant commander shows up at the training field. He reports that after all their searching, they were unable to find any trace of the Duke and his wife. Even the Emperor with his extensive connections could not do this. Their daughter, named Isabella, is safely hidden from the long tentacles of His Majesty. He recently ordered a raid on the ducal estate, killing everyone inside. By that time, the owners of the estate had disappeared, and the mercenaries were forced to admit that they had failed. Lexus understood that the impending danger had been known in advance, which meant that the enemies were among friends. Cassius spoke about his past meeting with the Empress and her order to find relatives. That evening, the unfortunate girl looked as if she was about to burst into tears. In her eyes, he saw a desperate hope to save the lives of those closest to her. If the commander's family had survived, he would have acted in exactly the same way. He decides to seek help from the allies who still remain in the neighboring lands. Meanwhile, Therion remembers the invitation to tea that came this morning. The envelope does not look like the one that usually contains an official letter. It felt like it was written by a girl he once knew. After reading the first lines of the invitation, Cassius realizes that it was written by Canaria. This girl asks to become a partner during a tea party, to which she was invited by the Empress herself. Therion is sure that his friend accidentally showed his attention at the last banquet. Be that as it may, if the Emperor's mistress asks for it, the invitation will have to be accepted. Lexus is ready to do anything to delay the delivery of the promised lands. Just like last time, you need special clothes for the tea party, and you should find a blue suit. For some reason, the assistant is sure that the blue suit goes perfectly with red hair. The world of metropolitan fashion is quite difficult to understand, especially for a military man. The guys don't notice the surveillance, continuing to cheerfully discuss the upcoming tea party. In their words, Lulu hears something that makes her forget about everything else. We need to return home immediately while the information we've obtained can still help. The next day, preparations are in full swing at Canaria's house. She has little doubt that the Empress is thus expressing her deep respect. Otherwise, it is impossible to explain why she invites her to the palace, knowing about her affair with her own husband. Surely, Renisha has resigned herself to a supporting role and now hopes to earn her mistress's respect. However, those humiliating moments when Canaria washed the Empress's feet are not yet forgotten. Once she promised that everything would change and Renisha herself would wash her feet. It's time to show her who really belongs at the Emperor's side. It would be foolish to refuse this opportunity, especially since Renisha herself took the first step. Looking at her reflection, she already imagines what the Empress's crown will look like on her head. She always felt that the current Empress was not good enough for such decorations. The next day, she decides to be the first to arrive at the residence of her main rival. The Empress was informed in advance about Canaria's visit, so the girl is already fully prepared. Having asked to let the guest in, the Empress thanks the girl for her time. In response, she assures that she can often visit her house if Her Majesty so wishes. This tone is unacceptable because everyone knows who this impudent woman's lover is. It is difficult to tell from Renisha's appearance what her true attitude towards this young woman is. Contrary to Canaria's expectations, she continues to act as if nothing had happened. The big news is that Sir Cassius has accepted her offer to become a partner. He will accompany her to the upcoming tea party at the Imperial Palace. Thus, two men at once fall under the influence of one cunning commoner. The news seemed a little funny. It turns out the girl really does have charm. Suddenly, the girl decides to share some tips on how to seduce men. She advises Renisha not to act like a log, which provokes the anger of all the ladies of the court. However, the girl insists that at this rate even Sir Cassius will turn away from her. She may have some more advice to give, but they should talk about this in private. After listening to all the insults, she asks to keep the advice to herself, because no one needs it. In this case, the girl can rest assured that her words were heard. For today, that's all she wanted to say and why she came to the Empress's residence. Finally, she asks not to hold a grudge, but everything that was said is true. The girl acts as if she is completely confident in His Majesty's patronage. However, she knows that even having received an invitation to tea, she does not have the respect of the nobility. Linda cannot understand why Her Majesty the Empress continues to tolerate a commoner. After thinking for a bit, she advises sweet Linda not to jump to conclusions and to just observe. She doesn't intend to tolerate these antics for long. Her turn will soon come. In the meantime, Canaria can pretend that she has become the mistress of the situation, who is allowed to do everything. Having understood her hint, the assistant is already anticipating how this small confrontation will end. In any case, she is ready to support the lady in any outcome without fear of His Majesty's wrath. To do this, she will have to do something that will help Renisha bring their common victory closer. On the same day, an envoy arrives at the Imperial Palace on the orders of the Empress. He claims that a year ago, Her Majesty provided assistance to a sick girl. Now it was time to respond with the same kindness, because the baby was saved. Lexus knows about this case, but was always sure that the palace doctors performed the miracle. According to the man, it was Renisha who gave them a rare medicine inherited from her father. They say that the elixir is able to revive even those who are on the verge of death. He really knows this elixir, passed down in the Lotera family from generation to generation. In the past, when assassins left him for dead, Renisha used him to heal the emperor. However, it was too long ago to be grateful for my salvation. If the youngest princess died on their territory, it could spark a dangerous conflict. The servant's words make sense, but this man's heart has not felt gratitude for a long time. After hearing the report, the emperor asks not to bother him with trifles, leaving time for what is important. Gifts from a foreign ruler can simply be taken to the empress's room. Besides, he would soon get rid of this woman anyway, sending her away from the capital. Once upon a time, her father put a bastard on the throne, not knowing how this adventure would end. That same day, Lulu decided to take charge of the tea party preparations, having resolved the costume issue. Lately, she has begun to take an active part in Cassius's life, which is worthy of gratitude. Therion offers to take her to a social event, having created the necessary disguise. Without waiting for permission, the servant quickly announces the arrival of an important person at the house. They were not expecting any guests at all, but this guest had arrived again on behalf of Her Majesty. Madame Turiel heard that the commander was again having difficulty choosing a formal suit. A blue outfit will be required for the tea party, although this is the first time such a requirement has been set. Everything needed is stored in the box. The commander doesn't even need to visit her boutique. The accessories look so beautiful, as if they were once used by the emperor himself. If they can do anything to show their gratitude, Therion asks the girl not to be shy and just say so. Meanwhile, Cassius will find a letter in the box, which he must not show to his assistant. Hearing this, he realizes that the message contains something very personal. Cassius remembers the way the Empress looked at him and how difficult it was to withstand that gaze. Even if they ask him to read it out loud, he will never agree to do it. 3 days later, on the day of the tea party, everything was ready for the festive event. The problem is that Canaria asked to come in a blue suit, but the commander couldn't even cope with that. At that moment, she notices the Empress, who is also dressed in a red dress. The girl insists that there was a mistake here because the invitation mentioned the color blue. On this account, she asks not to worry because Renisha sets the rules herself. Perhaps she accidentally sent an old invitation, forgetting to change the color to red. The situation is indeed awkward, but Cassius explains that he is only following Her Highness's orders. Thus, among all the invited ladies, only Canaria remains in a blue dress. Once everyone is seated, Renisha asks to begin the tea party, thanking the guests for their visit. They can enjoy treats prepared to special order. Tea drinking is truly magnificent, especially when it is graced by Canaria's offended face. The Empress did a good job of noticeably lifting the spirits of the ladies of the court. Only one person in the company wants to change the atmosphere a little. The girl suddenly reports that she heard strange rumors that are spreading among the palace servants. They say that Sir Cassius is getting married soon, and the Emperor is personally preparing for the upcoming wedding. Such false rumors make the commander perk up. This goes beyond the bounds of decency. However, it is true that His Majesty shows great attention to the hero of the Empire. It is difficult to understand who will become the commander's wife and go with him on a long journey. Taking her hint, Renisha only wishes for the bride to be a worthy match for a true warrior. Some ladies behave so lowly that they can sometimes defame their husband's good name. On this note, the Empress suggests ending the tea party since they have discussed all the main topics. There is only one conversation that has not yet taken place. The girl asks Sir Cassius to stay, with whom she intends to exchange a few words. This won't be difficult, and besides, the service is postponed until the title ceremony. Left alone, she offers to drink another cup of fresh tea. Renisha is curious to know his opinion about the tea party and some of the invited guests. He admits that Canaria's last words make him a little nervous. She was talking about a marriage contract that the commander had to sign for some reason. However, whatever the Emperor has in mind, Renisha advises simply ignoring his words. If the request turns out to be too stupid, he has the right to simply refuse, coming up with any excuse. At this point, Cassius decides to confess that the task assigned by the Empress has not yet been completed. He knew that finding his family would not be easy, but he didn't think the task would take so long. However, until it is completed, the commander promises not to forget about the assignment for a minute. Someday he will definitely do this, and Renisha will be able to meet her family again. His promise sounds like a knight's oath, although it is not the commander's direct responsibility. Suddenly, she decides to drop all her masks and ask directly about her last conversation with her father. She demands to know what her father told her to tell his daughter when he saw him last. That evening, after a difficult battle, Duke Lothar's army found itself at a disadvantage. The enemy army tried to advance towards the center, forcing it to respond with a frontal attack. However, the Duke decided to do it a little differently, setting up an ambush in a narrow passage. It won't be easy, but this is the only way they can change the balance of power and win the battle. I had to give a long speech, inspiring the soldiers to another feat. Ultimately, he manages to convince his subordinates of the necessity of such a decision and of a quick victory. Not one of them wavered. Each fighter fought as if it were the last time in his life. At parting, Duke Lothar asked me to convey a message for his daughter, who remained in the palace. Her father said he doesn't hold it against his daughter, knowing how difficult it is for her to be around Lexus. He asked me to tell her that he loves her more than life and will fight until the very end. That night, Duke Lothar dies, leaving behind only these words addressed to his beloved daughter. It seemed as if the whole world turned upside down when Renisha heard this. She knows perfectly well that it was her husband who sent her father to the place where the Duke was supposed to die. In this way, he got rid of a man who had become a serious rival. For Cassius, this man was also very dear, replacing his own father for a time. Right now, they are united by a common goal to correct the main mistake of the past. Duke Lothar was indeed mistaken in thinking that the young man would be grateful for saving his life. After placing Laxus on the throne, he planted a bomb that ultimately destroyed the entire Lothar family. At that time, the future emperor was still too young to arouse any concern in the Duke's family. Such a weak young man evoked nothing but pity and a desire to help him. It was Renisha who became the one who healed her future husband with the help of a rare elixir. The elixir was intended for members of the Lotera family, but this case was special. The girl seemed intoxicated by the idea of saving his life, and day after day she got him back on his feet. After that, she regretted her decision hundreds of times, but it was too late to turn anything back. In response to her father's last words, she now wants to scream loudly that she alone is to blame for everything. If Laxus hadn't become so strong, he wouldn't have been able to kill the Empress's parents. There is some truth in the girl's words, but the commander does not dare say anything. He only asks for a little calm because the people of the Empire need her more than ever before. Surely Duke Lothar would not blame his daughter, since it was he who decided Lexus's fate. Instead of grieving about the past, Cassius suggests thinking about what will happen in the future. He is right. Renisha also does not intend to give up, having given herself her word that she will repay the debt. Right now, they are so close that the girl can clearly hear his heartbeat. Suddenly, she stands up abruptly, wanting to walk a little and clear her thoughts. If it weren't for Cassius, the Empress would have had to torment herself for a long time with memories of the past. You can regret what happened for a long time, but you need to move forward without stopping. She admits that the nightmare has been haunting her dreams for a long time. The same dream, in which the brother and niece are already dead, often makes me wake up. In this nightmare, they blame the Empress for their death, sending her terrible curses. In response, the commander directly asks whether she will be able to sleep tonight. Even in such a gloomy moment, his funny question makes me smile. The Empress asks not to worry, because for the first time in a long time she will sleep peacefully. Renisha is really glad that they were able to meet and talk about it openly. However, Cassius's intentions only grow stronger, and he begins to treat the Emperor differently. If he treats those closest to him like this, what will the Empire become? It is obvious that in his eyes his legal wife is no different from a court servant. That evening, Renisha feels different, as if a heavy stone has fallen from her heart. She understands that meetings with Cassius must continue because he is her main ally. Having noticed the mistress, the assistant decides to quickly leave the chambers, allowing her to rest in peace. She doesn't have time to warn about something strange that hasn't happened for quite some time. The strange thing is that instead of an empty room, there is a person whose appearance you want to forget. Looking at her husband, the Empress asks him to explain what he needs in her bedroom. Lexus believes that he is in the exact place where he should appear every night. It's funny to hear something like this from a man who has had a young mistress in his bedroom for a long time. However, too much time had passed since he last visited his wife. Today, he decided to fill the gap in their family relationship. Renisha asks her assistant to bring her something light to drink before bed. Having received the order, she quickly leaves the chambers, realizing how difficult it is for the mistress now. It's hard to understand why the Emperor staged this circus, but everyone had long since gotten used to his antics. He seems to get pleasure from hurting those closest to him. Lexus asks to come a little closer to him, otherwise it will be impossible to fulfill his marital duty. After all, Renisha is his legal wife, and he has the right to get what is his. The young emperor wants to see love and devotion to her husband in his wife's eyes. This is not difficult to do, you just need to remove all excess clothing from your body. He likes her much better this way, except that her facial expression is a little gloomy. He continues to act like a husband, knowing that everyone knows the name of his mistress. Renisha was the one who first learned about Canaria, but for a long time she silently endured the insult. Instead of kissing back, she starts looking at objects, trying to find something heavy. A vase is quite suitable for quickly relieving yourself of torment. Now the emperor is completely defenseless and is unlikely to have time to understand her plan. This may be her only chance to end this quickly by avenging her father's murder. However, she decides to retreat, otherwise her plan of revenge could end in her own death. After a short time, the emperor admits that Renisha has not changed one bit. He had never felt any love before when he was alone with his wife. But today, Lexus suddenly realized why the idea of having a young mistress came into his head. When he hugs his wife, it feels like he is touching a cold, lifeless corpse with his hands. Such compliments are unlikely to please a woman, but Renisha does not dare object. After waiting for her husband to leave, she quickly calls the servant into her room. This dirt needs to be washed off. The maids have been ordered to prepare a bath immediately. The next morning, she can hardly remember the events of that nightmarish night. But now you need to throw unnecessary thoughts out of your head and continue moving towards your goal. According to the butler, she was lucky to leave the capital in honor of the coronation anniversary. Renisha retains only the southern lands, where the harvest is gathered annually. The rest were sold for cash. In addition, half of the wardrobe can also be sold. There will certainly be buyers for this item. It looks like the husband's mistress will try her best to buy every dress that is put up for sale. The main news is that Sir Cassius has sent his messenger to tell us something. He ordered the letter to be delivered, but the seal on the envelope seemed a little strange. After opening the envelope, Renisha spends a long time trying to figure out whether the letter really belongs to the commander. Until today, she had not seen his handwriting, but the truth is revealed in the very first lines. In the letter, Isabella asks her aunt not to worry because Sir Cassius takes good care of her. They will see each other soon and will be able to communicate for a long time, but now they need to remain vigilant. At the end of the letter, the girl asks to take care of herself, trusting the commander and his entourage. This is perhaps the best news to come to the palace in the last few years. The niece didn't have time to write about everything, but it was enough to make Renisha happy. Meanwhile, the emperor's mistress is in her chambers examining the decorations. The purchased jewels previously belonged to the empress, but there is nothing special about them. Canaria is sure that in her jewelry boxes there are many more beautiful pieces of jewelry than these. The current empress has problems with taste, but the future one will not have such problems. She is confident that the title of empress is almost in her hands. It is only a matter of time. If she gives the emperor an heir, the girl will finally strengthen her position. All the maids will have to be replaced, although this issue will not be difficult to resolve. Suddenly, she decides to remind Barbara of her main role in this house. The maid understands perfectly well that Canaria needs a child for everything to go as it should. When the empress leaves the capital, they will immediately begin to look for someone to replace her. Without waiting for orders, Barbara promises to do whatever the future empress wants. We need to find a man with purple eyes who looks like the emperor. If she doesn't follow orders, she'll put not only Canaria at risk, but herself as well. On the same day, a guest again visits the house where the military camp is located. As on the previous occasion, Madame Turiel arrived on behalf of Her Majesty to convey words of gratitude. The Empress received the gift and is confident that she will be able to repay it soon. The problem is that Therion didn't send any gifts, as he honestly admitted to the commander. All this time, Turiel was truly sure that after the pleasant gift, Renisha's mood improved. However, if it is not him, then who is sending gifts to the Empress on behalf of Cassius? The commander apologizes, but he needs to leave urgently for a while, leaving his guest. In his place, he leaves behind his faithful assistant, Therion, a guy who will surely become an excellent conversationalist. He immediately gets down to business, offering to drink another cup of fresh tea. However, Madame Turiel's conversations are much more interesting than tea, coffee, or anything else. It seemed the young man was a little nervous, having become too unaccustomed to communicating with ladies. Therion admits that there are only men in the military camp and sometimes he feels awkward. However, besides small talk, there are also serious conversations that should not be forgotten. Therion believes that the Emperor has good reasons for keeping the detachment in the capital. Moreover, the Empress's plans also remain secret, as does the strange manifestation of kindness. The Emperor feels inferiority towards the Empress after the murder of her father. It was no coincidence that he gave Sir Cassius the title of Duke and sent him to live in the lands that belonged to Lothair. In this way, he clearly wants to disgrace the Empress and Cassius himself, and perhaps even kill them. Madame Turiel asks him to keep quiet about this, otherwise it could cause harm to his commander. Even walls have ears, especially if you find yourself in the very center of palace intrigue. Right now, in the military camp, they are safe, but how long will it last? Meanwhile, Cassius is rushing to get to the room where he intends to get an answer. Turiel didn't lie when she said that the gift was sent in his name from the house where the camp was located. So there is only one person who can send this strange gift. He will surely find Lulu here, unless she decided to run away after sending the package. However, the main thing is that the girl is okay, because she is the one in mortal danger. Luckily, Lulu was there, not expecting anyone to burst into the room unannounced. Cassius apologizes for frightening her, but the visit of that lady left him no choice. She recently left home without telling him, but with memory loss, she definitely won't survive away from home. If the commander's guess is correct, she did not lose her memory at all and lied, fearing dire consequences. He asks to tell everything calmly, without fear of Cassius and his faithful assistant. In this house, no one would dare to harm the girl. On the contrary, she is under the protection of the army. Now she must confess whether she sent a message to the Empress on his behalf. This question leaves her stumped. It turns out that the commander has already guessed everything. If this is the case, it is worth answering directly, because he will soon have a meeting with Renisha. At this moment, two guys decide to have a little snack, not noticing the strangers around. Noticing a crying child in front of them, they demand that the commander step aside. It must be proven that this is not at all what his subordinates might have thought. He didn't mean to hit the girl at all, but it's not that easy to justify yourself in such a situation. After some time, he returns to the office, trying to comprehend what is happening. It's strange, but he still looks so scary to Lulu that she avoids him. The assistant notices how much the commander's mood changed after talking with the girl. Now the whole camp will be discussing for a whole month how a grown man brought a child to tears. By the way, Madame Turiel had urgent business to attend to, so she did not stay in the house for long. However, the main thing has already happened, because after talking with her, Therion has new information. He asks to give him a little time. There is an important conversation that concerns Cassius. The next morning, the Empress wakes up in a completely different mood. Now she knows that all this time she was not in vain hoping for the best and enduring the pain. Of course, after reading the letter from her niece, she immediately burned it in the fireplace, leaving no trace. All these years she lived with one hope, wanting to find surviving relatives. If you go to Hillstein, Renisha will be able to personally take care of Isabella without leaving the settlement. Her thoughts are interrupted by the voice of a servant who announces the arrival of a new guest. Linda asks that this be left to her before the Empress meets the stranger in person. She wasn't expecting any visits today, but this man didn't intend to inform her in advance. It is clear that he has arrived on urgent business, although it is already clear what he wants to talk about. The Empress asks for calm behavior. Sir Cassius seemed a little worried to her. She speaks as if she knows the reason for the excitement, although he did not have time to report anything. Moreover, the Empress never behaved so openly, preferring a reserved tone. However, she takes his hand, as only happens between close people. It's strange that after this the commander takes his hand back, asking to take the conversation more seriously. In response, Renisha tells him not to be so prim. After all, she has done nothing to deserve it. The commander had never been prim with her, and this phrase was just a pretext to change the subject. When he gets angry, his face becomes incredibly funny, like that of a guilty child. The Empress asks for forgiveness. She simply remembered a funny incident from her childhood. If the unprim Sir Cassius wishes to talk, she is ready to listen to him to the very end. With such treatment, it becomes even more difficult to talk about serious topics. For the sake of this conversation, he had to put everything aside and leave the camp during the preparations. Recently, there was a rumor that the Emperor was planning to organize an unusual engagement. The point is that he himself will become the groom, and according to Lexus's plan, Renisha will become the bride. Now the commander must find out how true these rumors about the upcoming engagement are. Pondering his question for a while, the Empress walks forward in silence. The truth is that little depends on her, because all the major decisions are made by Lexus. Sometimes it is difficult to understand what is on this person's mind and what his next decree will be. But even so, Renisha would like to ask something in response, since they had started talking about engagement. She wants to know what Cassius's answer will be if the Emperor forces him to marry her. The answer to this question had long been ready, although for the Empress it came as a great surprise. The commander assures that he will agree to accept this, taking Renisha into his possession forever. If she prefers another place, he is ready to go anywhere, just to stay away from the capital. There is no doubt that these two have been a couple for a long time, but no one knows about it yet. The Emperor seemed to recognize his wife and knew she had never communicated with him so openly. Their engagement plan will be easy to carry out, since Cassius himself is in love with the Empress. Now it is clear why the wife was so cold when left alone with her legal husband. When Lexus came into her bedroom, his wife pushed him away with all her appearance, not wanting intimacy. And now she smiles as if for the first time in her life she has experienced true happiness. When Lexus's life was hanging by a thread, there was only one loyal person. He was sure that he would not survive, but then fate made the young man believe in a miracle. Only Renisha was there and managed to find a way to save the life of her future husband. The dying illegitimate prince fell into the hands of this amazing young woman. Sometime later, Lexus was wondering if he could get ahead of his influential brothers. At that moment, someone enters the room without knocking, as if the brothers were already at the threshold. He is almost certain that right now his path will end and the brothers will do their dirty work. However, upon seeing the guest, the young man did not immediately believe his own eyes. Having prepared fresh soup, Renisha asks to eat a little, otherwise she will not have enough strength for a full recovery. Thus, this stranger becomes the only salvation and the path to a new life. Of course, the Emperor remembers this even now, but gradually his character began to change. Those glorious days when they were just starting to know each other are a thing of the distant past. For some reason, it seems to him that even at that time the girl was unable to truly love him, following her father's orders. Meanwhile, the anniversary of His Majesty the Emperor's accession to the throne is approaching. There was quite a lot to do, but for Canaria there was something that was more important than all other concerns. The maid assures that she looks perfect, and her image will surely please not only the Emperor. Understanding her hint, the girl thanks Barbara for her kind words, hoping that she will be right. A few nights ago, she said the same thing when the girls entered the secret place. Barbara found a suitable man for her mistress, who looked like the Emperor. I had to endure his disgusting and dirty touches, but for a great cause this is a small price to pay. In this way, she will be able to become the mistress of the palace if she becomes pregnant by a stranger. The child will be given in marriage to the Emperor's heir, and the fate of that prisoner is already sealed. Meanwhile, the girl is ready to enter the hall, well prepared for the anniversary celebration ceremony. She intends to cross the line that will leave her slave life in the past forever. In this form, Canaria no longer resembles a beggar girl forced to wash her mistress's feet. On the contrary, she herself becomes a mistress, especially since the servants have long known about the Emperor's choice. Having noticed His Majesty's mistress, they immediately recognize the fabric that was intended for the Empress. Such clothes can only be worn by a representative of the upper class, which she is not. In response to Lexus's compliments, the girl assures that there was very little time to prepare. Walking past them, Renisha notices the necklace. It was already on her husband's mistress. It's funny that he even takes gifts for Canaria from his legal wife's favorite collection. Renisha must admit that the girl really does look great with that necklace. Unexpectedly, a new guest appears at the event, although he is well acquainted with the Empress. The prince did not arrive by chance. He wants to convey words of gratitude from his father. Once Renisha helped his sister recover from a fatal illness with the help of a potion. In response, she assures that this is the duty of every person, and she simply did as her conscience dictated. However, Matteo asks that he remember that his family is indebted to the imperial family. Lexus promises not to forget this, reminding him of his duty in difficult times, if they come. It would be a great honor for the king to provide reciprocal assistance. He can be considered an ally. Linda is a little surprised that the prince decided to pursue foreign policy instead of diplomacy. Usually such messages are transmitted through special people, but the king sent the crown prince. Rumor has it that the prince came to resolve the issue of mineral extraction. It seems that this Eastern prince interested not only Linda, but also Sir Cassius. His assistant understands perfectly well why the commander's mood suddenly changed upon seeing the prince. If you think about it, he has a lot of power in his hands and he could be a great match for Renisha. In response, he asks her to calm down. After all, the Empress will not throw herself into the arms of a stranger. However, the prince will stay here for quite a long time, during which time they will have time to establish contact. These conversations make him think, what if he is right and Renisha intends to change the plan? A former slave has no right to tell the Empress what to do and ruin a profitable engagement. However, his friends ask him not to think about it too much, otherwise Renisha will notice his excitement. Therion is confident that the commander looks much better than his new rival. If necessary, he can appear in a new guise of a hero lover, thereby striking the girl. The cute guy look is also suitable if Cassius learns to get the right look and changes his style a little. However, with such nonsense he will only scare away this girl, who values something completely different in a man. Sir Cassius's reliability is the main value that only he has. Perhaps this is why the Empress turned her attention to him and entrusted him with her secret. In any case, friends are confident that in the future Renisha will definitely become his wife. She will certainly want to spend the night with him when the right moment comes. It is known that such a privilege has long been closed to one's own husband since the appearance of Canaria. The commander became so agitated by these conversations that his face turned as red as his hair. He asks to end the conversation, waiting until everything becomes clear. Meanwhile, Lexus refuses intimacy with his lover due to a sudden migraine. This is the first time this has happened, but today my head is splitting into pieces from the palace bustle. Passing by, Renisha guesses what is behind his lover's change in mood. The truth is that such a refusal means that the girl's plan, which only the maid knows about, is thwarted. Lexus could have continued to enjoy every day with this girl, but she called for death to come to her. 3 hours later, as the Emperor had ordered, Renisha was forced to appear in the bedroom. However, Lexus never showed up here, although the story about the migraine was just an excuse for Canaria. When the girl decided to leave, the one you least expect to see in such a place appears on the threshold. It is Sir Cassius who comes into the Empress's bedroom, dumbfounded with surprise. It's hard to find the right words when you accidentally open the wrong door and see what's most secret. He quickly turns towards the door, apologizing for his slowness. However, she asks not to waste energy, because the door to the Emperor's bedroom only opens from the outside. In other words, right now, they are locked in her bedroom, and the Emperor is definitely not going to show up. It seemed they had fallen into his trap, and Cassius's accidental arrival was not so accidental. 3 hours ago, at the end of the banquet, the Emperor wanted to thank the hero for saving the Empire. The servants went over various versions of what Lexus had prepared as a reward for the commander. After some thought, he suddenly declares that his wife is his main value. Taking his hint, Cassius asks him not to continue this madness, otherwise he will be forced to go against it. In response, Lexus demands that his subject calm down, not forgetting who he is talking to. It's strange, but even Renisha asks to thank the Emperor for his generosity. These are the kind of gifts you least expect. They feel more like a nasty mockery. Canaria doesn't even try to hold back her laughter. She knew that everything would turn out exactly this way. The Emperor's migraine seemed to have gone away on its own, and in this situation the girl decided to take action. She assures that it is always pleasant to see His Majesty in high spirits. However, she is also entitled to one gift, which she intends to receive right now. Unlike the gift to Sir Cassius, the Emperor actually got his hands on something very sweet. It must be said that Canaria prepared well, having foreseen such an outcome in advance. Usually such women always get their way, but what will happen next, only time will tell. All her life she strived to stand on the same level as Her Majesty. It was quite humiliating to look up at the Empress while washing her mistress's feet. However, even after a sweet night, Lexus remains gloomy, as if something is gnawing at the Emperor from the inside. Canaria offers to continue their little fun if he gives the order. Even now, Lexus can't stop thinking about Duke Lothair, believing that the nobles will follow him. For some reason, he is sure that the war is already lost, even if he manages to get rid of his wife. In that case, the girl suggests getting rid of the Duke himself, since he's the one causing Lexus's migraine. By eliminating the cause of the migraine, he will get rid of headaches forever, returning to his previous life. Lexus has always appreciated this kind of advice because it is the best solution. He didn't expect his young lover to be so smart. Now they can continue their sweet night, and all the orders can be given tomorrow morning. Canaria wants to give birth to a child as soon as possible, taking the place of Empress Renisha. At the same time, Cassius continues to explain that he was sent to this room by His Majesty. Renisha was also summoned by the Emperor, so it turns out he didn't invite them by chance. By the way, the girl notices his new outfit. It suits his stern image very well. The girl suggests not to make a problem out of this accident and just sit next to her. Surely the commander does not know what clothes mean if a woman gives them to a man. This means that she wants to undress him, and thereby hints about this to her chosen one. Still not understanding what is happening, he silently watches the actions of this irrepressible empress. If they were real lovers, Renisha would probably pounce right now. The commander clearly didn't expect to hear such a confession, although she assures him that it was just an inappropriate joke. It's better to return to your previous relationship and just drink hot tea. She suggests trying this wonderful drink with a special aroma. Let's hope that the girl didn't add deadly poison to the cup instead of regular tea. However, if she decided to do this, Cassius is ready to drink it, fulfilling the will of the Empress. Taking a sip, he suddenly realizes that the taste of the tea is somewhat reminiscent of the drink they make in the camp. They have a special person for this purpose, but his tea is always refused. After being rejected again, Lulu always wonders why no one likes this tea. The main thing is that the Empress's tea was exactly the same, its taste could not be confused. The errand boy who loves this drink has light curly hair. Renisha remembers that her niece also had hair like that and couldn't make tea. The strange thing is that they were talking about a boy, although all the other signs matched perfectly. She begins to describe all the details of her niece's appearance, which increasingly hint at Lulu. The commander decides to ask directly what will happen between them if they spend the night together. Renisha is confident that now everything depends on the commander's choice, because he holds the cards. After moving to Hilshane, she promises to help restore the barren lands if they go together. She will make these lands the best in the entire empire just because Cassius takes her away from the capital. But the main target is the emperor, who has long deserved his fate. She offers to kill Lexus, freeing the people of the empire and ensuring the safety of the family. It all depends on how he accepts the misfortune that has befallen him and how he reacts to challenges. For example, in the distant past, the Empress was angry upon learning of the death of her parents. She wanted to kill the Emperor with her own hands, taking revenge for everything he had done. Since then, Renisha has wanted to offer the corpse of this man to the altar of her parents. There was never anything between them that they could later regret. Lexus was never a good husband, preferring to change women like worn-out gloves. But Sir Cassius immediately seemed completely different to the Empress. He was always devoted to one thing. The girl suggests going together after all. Marriage will be beneficial for both of them. Gracefully offering him her hand, she patiently waits for a moment for a response. Instead of simply kissing her hand, he suddenly seals their agreement with a friendly handshake. Renisha had no idea that some men didn't know etiquette at that age. She can't help but laugh, but the commander's answer was actually quite funny. Cassius must know that a gentleman must kiss the palm when a lady extends it. Having quickly corrected the mistake, the man kisses the palm as the Empress wished. He is truly embarrassed by this embarrassment, but people in his position are too far removed from high society. However, he continues to behave too strangely, as if something special had happened. The commander is not very keen on kissing every lady's hand when he meets her in person. In this case, he will have to do this too often, but a simple greeting will do. As a child, Cassius was taught that you should not touch a woman's hand unless she is your fiancé. Renisha admits that she herself is inclined towards similar ethics, although this is now in the past. In the modern world, such norms are no longer in effect and only old believers observe the rules. Taking her hands again, he suddenly realizes that they are colder than ice. It's amazing how cold the hands of a girl with such a warm heart can be. This compliment was given at the right time, because they were still alone. They both simply lacked warmth, but on this snowy night they give their warmth to each other. At the same time, Canaria also generously shared her warmth with the Emperor, but no one will warm his heart anymore. Tomorrow Renisha will leave the Imperial Palace and perhaps disappear from his life forever. She will leave with a man whom Lexus personally chose for a life together in harsh conditions. Lotera will no longer be a threat, and then he can become a true emperor. However, something is bothering him, as if the old Lexus is still somewhere nearby. Trying to drive away the stupid visions, the young man seems to be deceiving himself. But he was not a monster before, and will someday regret the crimes he committed. Lexus was not used to admitting mistakes, which meant that everything that happened was predetermined by fate. The next morning, Sir Cassius's thoughts become clearer, and he no longer doubts his choice. The commander behaves surprisingly calmly, not at all avoiding the Empress. This is quite good news, but Renisha still wants to understand what he has been thinking about all morning. By the way, these books were banned by the Emperor and are kept only in this place. They describe the history of all the great rulers, but Lexus wants to be the only one. That is why he gets rid of every strong leader with such fury. Renisha's father had long since secured support among the nobility, and Lexus feared their unification. Cassius also noticed that he began to behave too unpredictably, as if he had completely gone crazy. Turning sharply towards him, Renisha offers him one last chance. There will be no turning back. If he just wants to get out of her life, he has the right to do as he sees fit. In response to this, the commander abruptly cuts off her words, vowing to be faithful until the end of his days. He will become her faithful husband and ally, not betraying the Empress even under threat of death. In this case, in exchange, she is ready to give everything that her future spouse wants. You can watch such a sweet scene forever, unless it concerns your legal wife. Lexus asks to explain since when Sir Cassius decided to spend his mornings in his bedroom. Just don't justify it by saying that he and the young Empress drank tea all night. That same day, the Emperor issued a special decree stripping Renisha of his family title. Out of mercy for his ex-wife, he did not punish them, wishing happiness to both lovers. It turns out that he called them into the bedroom only for the sake of a divorce and getting rid of the Empress. Renisha wasn't surprised at all, but Lexus could have made it a lot easier. By evening, everything was ready for departure, and the Chamberlain read out His Majesty's orders. He decided to give her the bodies of his murdered parents, hoping to make Renisha feel even more pain. Everyone knows very well about the contribution of the Lotera family, but this was the decree of the head of the empire. Linda demands that this absurd decree be stopped and that the honor of the great family not be dishonored. If the assistant so wishes, she can renounce her mistress, following the example of all the others. After all, it is none of her business, and she does not deserve to be expelled. In response, the girl promises to go with Renisha, since this is the path chosen by the true Empress. The most devoted ladies-in-waiting also wish to stay with her, even after moving to a harsh land. Only now does she seem to be recognizing those close to her who served her with such sincerity. Linda has no idea that this dead land will soon turn into the most desirable place. She has already made sure that the transformation of the barren lands takes place as soon as possible. For now, we just need to hold on, trusting in the one who always remembers goodness. 7 years in the palace were repeating days that stretched on like an endless chain. But today the link in the chain has finally been broken, allowing her to become free. No matter what happens, Renisha will not allow the flame that burns in her heart to go out. One day this fire will burn the Emperor and his entire closest retinue of traitors. Having seen off his former mistress, the Chamberlain again appears before the Emperor with a report. As he had ordered, Henry destroyed all traces of her presence in the imperial palace. However, Lexus did not notice a single tear on Renisha's face as she left that place. Apparently, she really did want a divorce, deliberately leaving Cassius in the bedroom. If this is so, then instead of the expected punishment, he prepared a gift for his wife. Lexus decides to fix this. He doesn't like giving generous gifts to the children of his enemies. An hour later, Cassius's assistant notices guests approaching from somewhere in the distance. The commander did not tell them that a girl would now be living with them in the military camp. Therion asks him to reconsider if he seriously intends to run away with the Empress. By such an act, he condemns them to certain death, and yet the soldiers trust him. After listening to the foolish lamentations, Cassius reminds them that he now has the official title of Duke. As is known, Lexus wants to marry him to his ex-wife and will not tolerate his vassal's refusal. The performance he staged in the palace was aimed at bringing about the final quarrel. From today on, Renisha is no longer the Empress, another woman will take her place. However, this did not affect the beauty's mood in any way, making her only happier. Perhaps this happiness is enough to share with your future husband. Of course, the commander has no time to talk with his assistant now he has other concerns. What is happening is not a dream, but soon Therion will get used to the changes. Events really do take a sudden turn, although there were all the preconditions for this. Amid the turmoil in the palace, some details can be clarified. Therefore, Renisha asks for one favor, if it is not too much trouble for Sir Cassius. She wants to stay in the capital for 2 weeks and only then go to her estate. It was unlikely that Cassius would be able to refuse, although it was a little dangerous to stay here for long. It would be better if the commander calmed his knights down a little. After listening to the request, he admits that he himself does not fully understand how they will resolve the issue with the army. These hot-blooded guys don't recognize anyone except the commander, but you can't take them along with you. The lands where the future spouses will live have a very harsh climate and dead soil. On this matter, the girl has one idea on how to make the dead land quite suitable. She seems to accidentally address him in the same way a wife addresses her legal husband. Renisha asks to get used to it quickly, because now there is no need to use a formal tone. His embarrassment would also pass if they just spent a little time alone in their home. She is confident that, away from assistants and servants, it will be easy for them to find a common language. Duke Cassius demands that he forget what his friend heard and not tell the soldiers anything. Otherwise, you will have to experience firsthand what a commander is like when he is in terrible anger. Hoping that the gentlemen have finished their discussion, Duchess Renisha asks to be heard. They have a lot to do today, and first of all they need to do some small changes in the room. The assistant asks not to worry about this. By the evening the commander's bed will be replaced with another one. Suddenly, Renisha wants to get down to the main business, which has caused her many sleepless nights. It's strange that she says this in such a tone, with such a sudden change in mood. That same girl named Isabella must live in the camp because it was she who sent the letter. The Duchess asks them not to make a secret out of this, because now they are obliged to be honest with each other. She recognized her niece's handwriting. It was stupid to convince Renisha otherwise. Cassius isn't entirely sure about it, but he simply can't refuse now. The problem needs to be solved right now, so he can fulfill his second promise. After a short time, they go to the top floor of the military camp. Isabella must be here somewhere, since they didn't meet her when they arrived. Usually she just runs along the corridor, but today it was as if she decided to hide in one of the rooms. Linda asks to find the girl quickly, otherwise the lady will become seriously worried. It's strange, but this sweet girl speaks to Therion as if they had known each other all their lives. Having collected his thoughts, he recalls the last time the little girl decided to hide in the back room. It's a pretty funny story, but looking at Linda, it's scary to talk about it. There is another oddity, because the Duchess was looking for a child named Isabella, but only Lulu lives here. Surely right now the lady is terribly worried about the life of this child. It's scary to imagine what the girl had to go through when she was left without her parents. According to Renisha, her niece changed her appearance, carefully disguising her identity. Otherwise, Lexus would not have shown mercy to the children of those he became his enemies. Isabella always grew up as a smart girl, capable of overcoming serious difficulties. Linda is sure that she is pretending to have lost her memory in her distant childhood. In fact, this is done only so as not to invent a new story about one's past. As a result, she had to change her name, gradually getting used to being addressed differently. Watching Renisha creep down the empty corridor, a lot becomes clear. Cassius warns that they can search for their niece together, but there's no need to keep it a secret. If they don't meet today, the girl will definitely be found tomorrow because her home is here. In addition, the Duchess is not allowed to walk around the corridor without shoes, unless she wants to get hurt. The Duke decides to carry her back quickly before she gets injured. In response, Renisha demands that she be released. She will not return without her niece. If he wants to help, it is better to simply do so, leaving his advice and warnings. The commander understands perfectly well what this girl means to her, and how important it is to return her to her family. Having listened to the reproaches, the Duke again asks to calm down, since now there is no reason to panic. If this is the greatest wish, the girl can be congratulated on its fulfillment. Isabella has been found. To meet her niece, you just need to go down to the lower floor. Meanwhile, Canaria is confident that the former empress will never return to the palace. She had been on edge with worry all this time, but today her efforts were rewarded. The crown belongs to her, which means all that remains is to give the emperor a little heir. The maid assures that with a crown on her head it is much more advantageous for her to appear in society. Moreover, this accessory suits Canaria very well, as if she was made for the role of empress. Of course, it's always nice to hear such compliments, but don't forget the main thing. She wants to get pregnant before gossip starts spreading among the aristocrats. Previously, everyone considered a girl an ordinary toy that could simply be thrown into the trash. Apparently, this is why she gets so into the role that she creates problems for her husband. Lexus had already warned her that she was not elevated to act like a spoiled brat. Canaria must understand its position and not do anything unnecessary. In fact, that warning was quite unpleasant to hear. Canaria intends to meet again with the man with whom she spent one night. She couldn't just sit back and watch as the emperor reduced her to the level of her former mistress. In the end, Renisha's words may come true, and then the girl will face the same fate. The outfit Barbara suggested was too simple, but this disguise would also work. Noticing the assistant's anxiety, she assures her that everything will be fine. No one will know their little secret, even if she spends a few nights with him. The emperor is too consumed by emotions and is unlikely to decide to change anything. However, Lexus himself was already there, trying to figure out where she was going. In such an outfit, the girl looks as if she is disguising her appearance before some business. Canaria knows that Barbara is the weak link, because she will tell Lexus everything. This time she was lucky, because instead of talking to the maid, he went to his mistress. It's hard to say which of the fictions is better, but the main thing is not to remain silent in front of Lexus. She assures that she would never have left without permission, knowing His Majesty's concern. After all, she is the main support and encouragement in such difficult times. The girl was just going to take a walk in the garden, hoping that this would not become a reason for gossip. When I thought back to the old days, the former empress always came to mind. Lexus decides to remind her that she has recently lost her top title. Hearing the news, the girl's mood becomes even better, because her main dream is finally coming true. After she leaves, I just want to stroll through the garden like an empress. But first, Lexus demands that she stop. She has not yet fulfilled her main duty. He will not let Canaria go until the woman he loves kisses her husband. The Emperor acts as if he came for just one meeting with Canaria. He had never behaved like this before, preferring to devote only his free time to her. But even now, when the squabbles in the palace do not subside, he suddenly begins to miss her. Of course, this is exactly what she was trying to achieve when she tried to eliminate the former empress. The truth is that when he is with her, the Emperor continues to see the real ruler. Perhaps he would have given a lot for just one meeting with the one he had rejected of his own free will. At the same time, Renisha asks to explain how long ago they found her niece. It turned out that the girl was found recently, but she refuses to leave her hiding place. Most likely, Renisha's visit made her too worried and she decided to take action. It is not difficult to understand a person who is used to fighting for his life every minute. Soon the commander takes her to a room where the frightened girl hides for a long time. Slowly approaching her, Renisha asks her to calm down. Now everything will be fine. It is hard to imagine how many tears Isabella shed while waiting for 1 minute to meet. She throws herself into the arms of her aunt, from whom fate separated her for many years. Renisha will never leave her alone again. It is within her power to fulfill this promise. Someday they will remember today's meeting, but for now they can just relax. It's worth finding another place, otherwise the soldiers won't let you talk in peace. Cassius suggests going to a room where no one will disturb him and he can collect his thoughts. At her aunt's insistence, Isabella decides to take some time to rest and gain strength. Linda had already seen a long sword mark left by someone right on the child's back. It runs diagonally and is very different from a normal scar. In response, Renisha orders that a doctor be secretly brought in and that new women's clothing be ordered from a tailor. Madame Turiel can certainly handle this. She has never failed in such situations. Because of Lexus, the girl found herself in such an unenviable position. He was a monster before, but over time his hatred for people only grew stronger. Isabella could have simply grown up in a prosperous family, surrounded by the care of her parents. If it weren't for this man, she wouldn't have had to see death with her own eyes. Renisha regrets that she didn't dare put an end to his miserable life that night. However, this should be done a little later, when the right moment comes. The wounds on the young lady's back turned out to be quite deep, although she prefers to hide the truth. As before, she claims that the scar was left by a blow from a knight's sword. There was poison on the blade, and according to the doctor, the fever lasted for at least 5 days. The doctor was unable to get rid of the mark, as this required special medications. After listening to the girl's story, the woman suggests making them less noticeable. The scar will not disappear completely, but only a few will know of its existence. Moreover, the young lady is still growing, which gives certain chances for a full recovery. The ointment left by the doctor should be applied at least twice a day. If you follow this rule, Isabella herself will soon forget that there was ever a scar on her back. Apart from the scar, there were no serious defects on the body, so the woman asks for peace of mind. The night's food was too boring, so the patient was advised to change her diet. Renisha thanks you for your time. Payment can be collected at Madame Turiel's studio. However, it is strange that all this time Isabella pretended to have lost her memory. She could very well have come up with a story that the knights would definitely believe. Instead, the niece had to pretend, although this is not easy to do for long. She insists that she was simply acting on the advice of her mother, who taught her this trick. It must be said that she played no worse than any actress from the main Capitol Theater. With such talent, she should definitely audition for some new play. But now you can take off your masks and just change into a dress, because there will be no more examination. I remember she used to adore purple dresses, ordering them more often than others. The knights soon learned that their little helper turns out to be a girl in disguise, but next to her they behaved as usual, not shying away from using rude language. As he passes, Sir Cassius warns them that from this day on they must change something. They are forbidden to behave in their usual way in Isabella's company. Even if a young lady asks you to behave as usual, you should not forget who your aunt is. She's unlikely to be pleased to learn that some knights are behaving too rudely. The boys decide to ask Therian about this, still not believing that the rumors about Lulu were true. In response, he suggests checking it out himself, although he will have to pay for the consequences. The girl has already had to go through a lot, and it's strange if they don't understand this. At this moment, they notice Isabella, who has managed to dress up in her favorite dress. In this form, she still resembles the past version of herself, while her hair is still short. Cassius demands that they stop staring at the young lady. They are no longer children to behave so stupidly. As expected, Isabella doesn't want them to become strangers to each other now. These people were kind to her, and the girl can communicate with knights as she did before. The commander will keep an eye on everything else if someone gets a bad idea. There is no doubt that at the first suspicion, this knight will regret his plan. After a short while, the boys decide to apologize for their behavior that morning. They behaved too rudely and want the girl not to get angry with her old friends. After hearing the apology, she reminds them that she still treats them like her own family. If you think about it, they really did replace their loved ones by accepting her into their ranks. It's hard to hold back tears when you see this, fully understanding the complexity of her fate. Renisha was glad that among Sir Cassius's knights there were quite noble young men. If it weren't for their care for the child, Isabella wouldn't have been able to smile so brightly after what she had been through. Cassius agrees with this, but for some reason the girl uses too formal a tone. If they decide to live together, they cannot behave in the old way, like strangers. Only now does Isabella realize that her aunt and Sir Cassius have decided to get married and leave the capital. It turns out that she is no longer an empress, and Lexis has become a complete stranger. Surely now she doesn't seem as scary to the little girl as she did when she was married to a tyrant. From now on, you can dispense with formalities by calling Renisha your aunt. It's hard to remember the last time they were so happy. Life is changing its usual course. Renisha suggests leaving all sorrows in the past, keeping only the happy present. The girl should not object if Sir Cassius becomes her uncle, because now he is also a relative. The question came as a rather unexpected surprise after all. The commander had done no harm to anyone. Even without knowing Isabella's origins, he always treated her with respect. There are no words to express my gratitude to this man. At this point, the girl decides to confess something, although she suddenly gives up on this idea. Someday she will remember what she wanted to say, but now the words seem to have flown out of her head. She can only hint to her aunt in a whisper so that Mr. Cassius does not find out about it. Having heard the young lady's secret, she understands that she can say a compliment out loud. Of course, it's a little funny how Isabella chose to say it. She really liked the commander, but for a long time she was forced to keep silent. From now on, Renisha asks not to make a big secret out of this, because now they have become one family. It seems like Cassius's life is getting more and more eventful every day. It won't be easy for him to get used to the new role, but for a while it's like becoming a father. And Renisha doesn't change her repertoire, she always intends to laugh at his reaction. However, it is not a mere coincidence that the young people have the same taste. The girl believes that he chose her niece as a student because he understood her excellent character. Perhaps he managed to bewitch her, so she fell in love with Uncle Cassius at first sight. Children always say what they really think, without fear of being ridiculed. At this point, Isabella decides to ask if her aunt shares her opinion. The conversations are only gaining momentum, although Cassius would prefer to talk about something else. He has to listen to compliments addressed to him every now and then, considering that it is a little unnecessary. Finally, Renisha asks to talk about it later, since they have already chatted a bit. She advises going to Linda. Her assistant will quickly teach you how to make wonderful tea. After saying goodbye to her aunt for a while, Isabella heads downstairs. Now nothing will stop them from discussing the main thing, for which all this work was done. Surely Canaria still believes that it was she who influenced the collapse of the Emperor's family. The stupid commoner has no idea what surprise awaits her ahead. Renisha is determined to find someone she can trust, and there's a lot of work to be done soon. She still remembers that the knightly order had the eyes of the Emperor. They are always difficult to identify. This tragic example made it clear that by missing this detail, you risk your head. It is impossible for a spy to give away all the information, revealing the future plan in advance. Cassius had already punished those traitors in front of all the knights, showing what happens to traitors. He is confident that the current composition of the knights consists only of proven people. There is still a lot of time ahead. It is worth taking a closer look at this. Renisha trusts her chief knight, but in such a situation, vigilance is never too much. Perhaps her help would be needed in this matter. She often had to do this in the palace. The main thing is not to reveal your actions until the right moment is available. The Emperor will immediately take notice of this and begin to act as usual. Now it is really quite strong, because Lexus got rid of all its competitors. The girl advises enlisting the support of families who were personally acquainted with the Duke of Lothar. They will serve not only for personal gain, but will also want to avenge the murder of a friend. All this time, Renisha will cover the rear as the most reliable and devoted ally. Every man would like to hear these words, especially in the most difficult moments. Canaria does not have enough cunning to retain power if the Emperor is gone. However, his place is vacant now if Cassius does everything she advises. She is sure that Lexus threw her out of the palace only because he sensed danger. In other words, Duke Lothar's former allies have enough influence to remove him. At such moments, the throne can shake violently under him, which is quite good news. Lexus must assume she's retreated to prepare for the next move. If Sir Cassius has not yet changed his mind, he must take a fresh look at many things. In response, he promises to do as the true Empress and his wife command. In that case, it would be worthwhile to start by meeting with the people from her small list one by one. And the very first visit will be a meeting with the person he had already met in the palace. It is surprising that his name tops the list, even though this is the prince's first time there. He promised to fulfill any request Renisha made as a reward for miraculously saving his sister. Meanwhile, Prince Matteo is in his residence reflecting on the latest news. He wants to know his assistant's opinion about Sir Cassius and the upcoming engagement. The servant is confident that this man is popular and respected among the local population. More than 100 elite knights followed him, which speaks of his impeccable reputation. Hearing this, the prince asks to find a way to get closer to him. He can become a future ally. Just in case, he decides to make one small clarification. If you have any problems with women, it's worth saying so right now. The servant asks not to worry about this. Everything is in order with this matter. It is known that by decree of the Emperor, Renisha was married to the hero Hientri. If he is truly a good man, this marriage should make her happy. However, the meeting is not cancelled. Matteo wants to look into the eyes of the former Empress's new husband. You can't trust ordinary rumors, you need to personally verify their validity. Realizing that he was determined, the servant did not dare to contradict the crown prince. He assures that he will carry out the order as soon as possible, inviting Cassius to an audience. After waiting for the assistant to leave, Matteo tries to understand one strange detail. If this man is really that good, then he doesn't stand a chance. Renisha had always been a puppet in the hands of the Emperor, but now her life had changed. Having become free, she has the right to choose a future spouse who will become a strong support. Since leaving the imperial palace, the girl has not shown any activity. Despite her connections to influential families, she continues to lead an ordinary life. Contrary to the Emperor's expectations, she does not represent the enemy he tried to create. In the face of his ex-wife, he sees an ordinary young woman who suddenly found happiness. With this commander, she seemed to have rediscovered the world, forever erasing the name of her ex-husband. Understanding how difficult it is for His Majesty, the Chamberlain offers him some wine. Usually he never refuses, but now he decides not to drink too much. From the very beginning of his reign, this old man has served the young emperor faithfully and truly. 8 years have passed since then, but Lexus is beginning to suspect something. At that time, Renisha was close to Heinrich, getting to know him before Lexus. Usually, loyal subjects are attached to their masters and remain faithful until the end of their lives. Coming closer, he thanks the Chamberlain for his faithful service he has endured a lot lately. He is the devoted servant who should be held up as an example for his impeccable work. It is time to do something very important for the current ruler and his master. That same evening, Henry goes to the mansion without notifying him of his visit in advance. Meeting him at his house, Linda demands to know what brought the man here at such a late hour. Henry asks for forgiveness, but he is only carrying out the orders of His Highness the Emperor. However, even important tasks can be completed during the day, rather than breaking into the house in the middle of the night. Hearing loud voices, the Duchess decides to personally meet the uninvited guest. Henry could hardly contain his emotions when he saw how much the young woman had changed. He quickly explains that the Emperor was deeply troubled after his ex-wife's departure. He knows that the mansion does not yet have a good manager capable of handling financial affairs. That's why Lexus sent him here, hoping that the girl would need Heinrich's help. The management of the household is the direct responsibility of the head butler. After listening to the proposal, the Duchess looked into his eyes in silence for a while. However, no help will be needed, and besides, the Emperor should not interfere in personal affairs. Before visiting the mansion, he ordered to go to the end, even if he had to endure humiliation. Lexus intends to know all the secrets in his ex-wife's house, and Heinrich will help him with this. By failing to carry out this order, the Chamberlain risks paying with his own life. Understanding the severity of the punishment, Henry kneels before the entire retinue of the young lady. He declares that from now on his life is in the hands of Duchess Renisha. The man understands how humiliating this is, but this is the only way to save life. Looking at Henry, the girl remembers how difficult it is to survive in the imperial palace. But if you let him into the house, he will definitely reveal all the secrets to his owner. It seems Lexus doesn't like that his ex-wife is being too quiet. This step was not taken at all because of feelings or suspicions of impending betrayal. And yet, Renisha will not feel any regret even if the Chamberlain dies wandering outside. The deal only made sense as long as it was in the capital, close to His Majesty. But now he won't be able to be of any use to her or her new family, and will only arouse unnecessary suspicions. After hearing the refusal, Henry admits that he will indeed never be able to leave the capital. However, he asks to remember what he did for the former empress when she needed help. It was Henry who picked up the bodies of her murdered parents, although the emperor had not given the order. It seemed that with these words he only made things worse, recalling that terrible night. Henry insists that he never acted to the detriment of the House of Lothair, even while serving the emperor. The late Duke asked him to take care of his daughter, and he still tries to keep his promise. Therefore, he asks for one more chance to fully fulfill the late Duke's will. He is right. My father really did value this man highly when he was alive. Renisha allows this chance to be taken, but if the espionage is revealed, Heinrich risks losing his life. It is forbidden to follow the Duchess unless he wishes to bring this moment closer. Now there is a man in her life who is ready to fulfill his duty immediately. Having finished the conversation, the retinue heads back to the house, leaving the Chamberlain Henry outside the gate. This alone will be enough to return to the imperial palace with good news. Once inside, Cassius suggests they face the truth and understand what they are getting into. However, Lexus is known for always achieving the goal he sets in his mind. It is better to agree to his terms, because the option with Henry is the safest of all possible. Otherwise, he will act more harshly, forcibly offering his services. Soon the spies will be crawling out one after another. The emperor has enough money and power for this. Even if nothing is found out, the news will gradually reach their ears. The next day, Cassius's assistant couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the emperor's decree. With his decree, Lexus forgives the empress's betrayal, exposing all the details in the central square. Therion decides to take the leaflet with him, showing it to his commander. However, a friend advises against doing this if you don't want to see Cassius in anger. Noticing the young soldiers arguing, Renisha decides to clarify what the subject of the conversation is. It seems the two were talking about how the Duchess should not read such vile things about herself. She is very interested in what kind of nastiness he is talking about and where he got this leaflet. The assistant assures that the guys can tear down all these leaflets that defame her good name. No one will believe this nonsense, written only because of the emperor's anger. As expected, Lexus thinks more about his ex-wife than about the current empress. This probably raises many questions among outsiders, although everything is clear to Renisha herself. Vile actions have long become a habit for this reckless man. True, some things are written too softly. The emperor could have chosen his expressions more carefully. After her overthrow, rumors began to circulate in high circles that she had immediately married Cassius. This was a blow to the emperor because he wanted to hurt his ex-wife. Instead, it looked as if she wanted to run away to another man. There were those who defended Renisha in the eyes of high society, but over time they began to fear wrath. The main news of the discussion is the vacant position of empress. It was Canaria who stayed in the palace the longest, so it turns out she is destined to become Lexus's next wife. The emperor could truly love her, knowing how much this woman had done. Meanwhile, Duke Cassius returns to the mansion, having found out some information. Today was the new Chamberlain's first day of service, and he hadn't yet had time to get used to some of the details. Cassius wants to know if there are any oddities that Henry has noticed. Realizing that nothing special has happened, the commander asks to leave them alone. However, they communicate so nicely that Henry himself would have left them without warning. As Renisha requested, the commander has already visited the club. This is his third visit. Many proposals have been made before, but one in particular deserves special attention. The Duchess is sure that they are once again plotting to launch a secret operation to overthrow the emperor. But things are a little different, because the best option may be to help the future empress. Now she is curious to know what Duke Cassius himself thinks about this. At that moment, he answered them that such issues were decided by another person. In that case, the next time she visits Sir Marquis, the girl asks him to convey her opinion. Canaria should become the next empress, because in her they will have an excellent opponent. It's strange that she's not even angry at the thought that this woman stole her husband. The truth is that she is not smart enough to be a serious competitor in the future. If necessary, she can be removed as easily as she could be placed on the throne. To be a strong empress, one must have extensive experience in dealing with the court nobility. Canaria has been a servant all her life and views social life through rose-colored glasses. She doesn't know where danger lies and where the real enemies are hiding. Perhaps the club thinks so too, but it's better to tell Cassius himself about this. More than anything else, the emperor despises those who have no abilities. As befits a husband, Cassius simply took his wife's side, not caring about Lexis's opinion. When the Marquis schedules another meeting, it will be to discuss uniting Renisha's allies. In this sense, he is an important trump card, having sufficient influence in the highest circles. Realizing this, the Duke decides to visit the club again if his role is so important. But first, it's worth spending a little time with his wife, since the commander has already been absent all day. During this time, she managed to miss me aren't simple hints enough for understanding. It feels like she's seriously planning to make Cassius into a loyal dog. With her languid gaze, the girl always suddenly leaves him speechless, making him blush. Renisha suggests taking a little break from work by doing something more interesting. Now that they are married, sooner or later they will have to discuss some things in detail. For example, spouses are supposed to spend the first night together. This issue is quite important. All this time she has been playing the role of a well-bred lady, and now she decides to do this. Actually, the commander is not against such discussions, but he has not yet had time to get used to it. He tries to be a loyal ally, serving his empress faithfully and truly. However, one should not forget about another role, where he must be a faithful and devoted husband. This role is very different from the first one. You need to be much more decisive. Taking the hint, Cassius decides to break all boundaries by kissing the Duchess on the lips for the first time. She likes him much more this way, although this is far from all that she expects from her husband. However, they will still have time to continue, but for now, there are too many servants in the house. He behaves very sweetly, each time embarrassed by the Duchess's words and her bold hints. It's impossible to look away when you see the face of this courageous hero who became a 5-year-old boy. Renisha asks to never change, always remaining the same sweet little dog. If he doesn't like such hints, there is only one way to make her shut up for a long time. This method should please both of them, because the Duke has long been tired of constant chatter. The next day, the commander goes to the club again. This is his 4th visit. As is known, it is the Marquis who is the main person on whom many decisions depend. The Duke apologizes for yesterday. He was a little overwhelmed by the problems that had befallen him. In response, he asks not to apologize. He himself said too much, for which he is now quite ashamed. By the way, even his personal assistant scolded him for such liberties, so they are even. Cassius decides to get down to business, reminding them of the discussion of the Empress's next candidacy. According to Renisha, it is Canaria that should take this place, and this conversation deserves special attention. It's better to talk about such things face to face, because even in the club there might be spies of the emperor. However, if the hero of the empire is on the side of the nobles, this gives hope for the success of the company. Alone, the Duke wants to know the truth, whether there is a way to make that woman empress. The Marquise believes that Canaria is not as naive as many courtiers believe. She had already realized that she needed to find a way to survive, since Lexis often changed his companions. Moreover, she has already made the right move, judging by her behavior at social events. This information became known only recently, but it seems that she is going to give birth to an heir. The source reports that the young woman is currently pregnant, but the father is not the emperor. Meanwhile, Renisha is in her chambers when her faithful assistant enters the room. Linda is confident that the girl looks much brighter than during her life in the imperial palace. Lately, she has been smiling more often, bringing light to everyone who meets her. Surely Sir Cassius is happy to be with her every day. Perhaps for Renisha herself it is not so noticeable, but from the outside it is obvious to everyone. Meanwhile, she hadn't met Isabella even once since the morning could it be that she was walking outside the mansion again. To her surprise, the girl decided to go to the knights, whom she considered friends. Preparations for departure to Hillshine are in full swing. The knights are just packing their things. Isabella wanders there out of simple curiosity, still embarrassed to show herself to them. Having decided to take a little rest, the guys try to remember how many boxes of things are left upstairs. A friend advises not to worry, as there should be enough grueling work to last the entire day. At this moment he notices Lulu, or rather Lady Isabella, not far from him. The knight warns that she must no longer be addressed in the same way as before. You should remember the commander's words about prohibited expressions, for which you will later have to answer. Approaching her, the guy asks not to disturb the young lady. They will cope perfectly well without help. In response, Isabella assures that she can do the simplest job if she is allowed. She promises not to tell Cassius about this. Besides, the commander is now far from the mansion. After thinking for a bit, the knight asks to take only light things and leave everything else on them. Isabella isn't quite sure if everyone is going to Hillshine or if the knights will stay here. It is not yet known, but as soon as the order comes, they will do as Sir Cassius says. He wonders where the young lady would be best placed if Isabella could choose. She could have stayed here, but it would still be interesting to visit Hillshine once in a lifetime. At this moment, Isabella realizes that her little secret has already been revealed. She didn't ask her aunt's permission when she decided to help the knights carry their things. The girl asks not to be angry, but she wanted to talk to her friends one last time. Noticing Sir Cassius behind her, she suddenly becomes quiet, afraid to say an extra word in front of this man. Realizing that Isabella hasn't gotten used to it yet, Renisha asks her not to make a secret out of simply helping with the luggage. Even if Sir Cassius objects, he will not scold her or make comments to the knights. Cassius also believes that the relationship between them should become more open. A second later, Isabella admits that she really wanted to help the knights with their things, asking to join them. Besides, she recently learned how to brew tea. Perhaps now Uncle Cassius will like it. However, you can do without tea if the commander does not want to spoil your appetite before lunch. However, she spent a long time learning how to brew it and can cook it just like Linda and Renisha. It's hard to find something suitable for such words, especially if you don't want to drink tea. It's a pity that today he is again being offered bitter tea made with a special recipe. Instead of answering, the commander suggests that they all enter the house together. The chamberlain is probably waiting for them. After some time, they are left alone, hoping to talk face to face. She thinks that the girl has already become attached enough to Cassius to call him uncle. She didn't expect him to find it so easy to approach Isabella after everything that had happened to them. Of course, she is grateful to him because it was the commander who once saved the poor girl's life. However, the main news is that the future empress is pregnant, which has recently become known. They say she will easily take the throne of the empress if she carries out her plan to the end. If the information is reliable, Lexus will soon have an heir to the throne. Until now, he had no children, so everyone considered him infertile. Renisha is ready to admit that with this move, this young woman was able to get one step ahead of them. The problem is that the child may be from another man, but the emperor doesn't know yet. We need to understand why she decided to take this step and what prevented her from having a child with her husband. At the meeting, the Marquis warned that they needed to be prepared for any outcome. This is quite interesting news. It could completely change the balance of power. If Marquis Danvers brought this up, it means he intends to arrange everything by the right moment. Someday the time will come to remove the Empress, if this girl ends up being the one. This will play into their hands, because with such a pretext, they can act much more boldly. It is enough to question the child's legitimacy, and gradually the truth will come to the surface. Perhaps right now they are at the origins of a split in power that will happen very soon. The Duke is sure that in troubled times, chaos always begins, which is then difficult to stop. However, Renisha asks not to worry. In 5 days, they will be leaving the capital for a long time. The main consequences of a schism always occur near the imperial palace. But the Marquis was right, because the commander really did need to prepare for another visit. A visit with the next person will be even easier than a conversation with the Marquis. Knights find it easy to get along, and the knight is next on her list. Count Caliot is the commander of the Royal Guard, which has protected the capital since its inception. This family is known to every resident because it represents the most ancient line of warriors. It could be said that in terms of their influence, they can be compared to the Lotera family in their heyday. They say that even at night, the warriors of this family do not let go of their swords. This is why no member of the family has been targeted for assassination in the last 10 years. The problem is that Count Caliot is hostile to all the nobles of the capital. To weaken his influence, Lexus formed an alliance with the nobles, killing his entire family. However, this man is not one of those who will blindly take revenge on the emperor, forgetting about reality. Talking to him will require something more than just the courage to be near the commander. Having said these words, Renisha holds out an object, which, upon seeing, Caliot will consider Cassius to be his own. In any case, he will at least accept the Duke, and what will happen next depends on Cassius. The coat of arms of the Earl of Caliot's family is meant to remind him of how cruelly the Emperor treated his family. He will be more favorable to anything that is said during the secret audience. However, he does not understand what promise was being discussed and what should be conveyed to the Count. It turned out that on the day he lost his family at the hands of Lexus, one family member was luckier. It was Renisha who saved his grandson from death, forever remaining a heroine in the Count's memory. At that time, the Lotera family stood at the very top, basking in honors and luxury. Lotera had all the blessings of the world, but Renisha remembered this time not only for the money. As a child, she was able to learn a lot from observing life in high society circles. Amidst the intrigue and gossip, there is something else that Duke Lothair managed to say before his death. He bequeathed to share what you have, and one day life will return it to you 100-fold. The Duke bequeathed to show care for other people, without fear of stumbling on the right path. However, while helping Lexus, she still made a mistake for which she now has to answer. There's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes fate presents unpleasant surprises. Therefore, Renisha is counting on Cassius's help. He must prove himself as a real man. The upcoming meeting will help them gain another ally, because their enemy has enough power. Having learned all the information, many things fall into place, and doubts disappear into thin air. The Duke assures that he will do everything possible to secure the man's support. He apologizes for his immaturity, but he won't shake hands this time. This tone pleasantly surprised the Duchess, because every day this man seemed to change before her eyes. His mere presence gives her strength, and together they are sure to achieve great things. And yet, it is now deep night outside, and it is time for Duke Cassius to get some rest. Meanwhile, Renisha intends to get some fresh air if he doesn't mind. After bidding Cassius good night, she leaves the commander alone with his thoughts. Going out into the corridor, the Duchess takes a long time to recover from her conversation with this man. Only during the conversation was she at ease, but it was quite difficult. Cassius, like a sweet poison, entangled her thoughts, forcing her to forget about everything in the world. She wants to drink it all down right now and do it again and again while they are alone. In the end, he simply drives her crazy, but it is impossible to do serious things like that. There is an important matter that needs to be completed, otherwise the whole plan will fall apart. Surely, her parents, who died painfully at the hands of Lexus, are watching her from heaven. Before they meet in heaven, their daughter has something to do on earth. As a sign of respect for their memory, Renisha promises to bring the scoundrel's head to the altar. Only after this will her soul be at peace, and the irrevocable debt to her parents will be repaid. A week later, the news of Canaria's pregnancy shocked the entire capital, becoming the most discussed of all. A child always brings joy, but there were rumors that he would never become an heir. The mother's origin raised too many questions and became the main topic. Eventually, the child will need a protector if Lexus refuses to acknowledge him. It is at this moment that Marquis Danvers realizes that his time for decisive action has come. The next day, the matter with Count Caliot was settled without much difficulty. The Count said that he remembered the promise given and immediately agreed to give up his man. Now all that remains is to meet with Prince Matteo and then immediately head to Hillshine. But before that, Renisha asks to have a good rest, because the decisive step will require strength. Having said these words, the girl again disappears behind the door of her chambers, leaving him in the corridor. This behavior of the Duchess seems strange, considering that she called him her husband. At this moment, the commander notices Isabella. She is no longer afraid to stay next to him. It must be said that since the truth about this girl was revealed, she has changed quite a lot. Joyfully greeting her uncle, Isabella asks to go into the tea room. It's nice to see that the child has started smiling a lot again and is acting so carefree. Cassius decides to ask her about his aunt. Perhaps she noticed some oddities. Renisha's behavior began to change, and who, if not her niece, would notice it? After thinking for a bit, she can't remember a single unusual moment. According to Isabella, her aunt has become even more cheerful and does not cause any concern at all. Now it's clear whose side she was on and who she considers to be in charge of the mansion. This child will not tell anything, even if unusual information comes to light. There is only one person left from whom we can try to find out something. Having met the Duke in her studio, Madame Turiel did not expect that he was still in the capital. Unfortunately, before departure, a problem arose related to Duchess Renisha. There is a more suitable place for such conversations. The woman suggests taking a short walk. Inside the house, she will offer him some tea to lighten the difficult conversation a little. This can be considered a love consultation, which she agrees to conduct with the commander. However, they are not even married, which means they need to find a more suitable name. In that case, Madame Turiel suggests choosing the name yourself. The main thing is that lately, Renisha has been increasingly distancing herself from him as if something had happened. He is unable to understand what caused her changeability and where he made a mistake. Sometimes it is very difficult to understand women. Their mood is always too changeable. However, the commander should remember how well their first night together went. If he did something wrong, he could very well disappoint his young wife. Suddenly, she interrupts the conversation, reminding us of another important detail. This concerns payment, since Madame Turiel is not used to giving free advice. It may seem a little rude to him, but life has taught him to use his knowledge wisely. Besides, now is work time, which she devotes to the commander and his problems with his wife. The fact that he traveled such a great distance to come to her speaks volumes about his attitude towards Renisha, but a long family life awaits them, which may seem like an eternity. Cassius admits that with all his heart he desires this eternity spent next to her. However, it is strange that all this time Madame Turiel was helping Renisha get closer to him. After a short pause, she declares that she only wants to see her happy. In that case, she must explain to Cassius what to do to bring this happiness closer to his wife. In fact, everything is simple. You just need to become a family for this wonderful person. His wife needs trust, having spent many years under the oppression of a deranged tyrant. It is not surprising that she cannot fully open up, because this takes time. But if he is serious about starting a family with the Duchess, he must earn her trust. Only in this way will all the problems disappear on their own, and she will stop locking herself in her chambers. In other words, more than anything else, she needs support, which Cassius is quite capable of providing. One day, her father took him in as his own son when the boy had nowhere to go. Now is the time to support Renisha if he still remembers his promise to Duke Lothaire. From the very first words of Madame Turiel, he immediately understood what this woman meant. Suddenly, she decides that she can start with the wedding, and everything else will happen by itself. At this point, Turiel suggests ending the conversation if the commander has no more questions. You shouldn't leave your wife for too long, otherwise she might misunderstand your absence. The conversation with Madame Turiel was very pleasant, and besides, the commander is beginning to understand a lot. After thanking the woman, he heads to the mansion, following her good advice. It seems that Renisha has already managed to meet with Prince Matteo, because the conversation was planned for today. It turned out that he asked to reschedule the visit for the following day, apologizing for urgent matters. However, all this time the commander is not telling us something, as if he himself had just returned from an important meeting. Without answering the question, Cassius suggests a short walk after dinner, if it would not be too much trouble for the Duchess. She's not against it at all, but with this proposal he makes her even more suspicious. They say a market is opening near the central square. There's probably something interesting there. It's better to go there together and then stop at a local restaurant after the walk. Renish doesn't need to be persuaded like that. You just need to change clothes for the walk. In her opinion, in this form they would attract too much unnecessary attention. The commander hopes that she will easily decide on the color of the outfit, as she once did at tea. Linda can help her if she is not busy with housework or accompanying the new chamberlain. After some thought, she decides that pink is the perfect color for this walk. Cassius reacts to this as if he had always dreamed of seeing Duchess Renisha in a pink dress. She decides to reveal his little secret, because it's easy to understand who Cassius met with today. She admits that she has no idea what Madame Turiel was talking about during tea, but it had such a positive effect on his mood that these meetings are worth continuing. The girl seemed to know that it was Turiel who advised him to invite his wife on a date. Otherwise, it is impossible to explain such a sudden invitation to an ordinary clothing market. Turiel's boutique smells of the lingering aroma of her favorite tea, which permeates her clothes. It was by this sign that the girl identified the commander and his secret meeting. Perhaps with such observation skills, this girl could become an excellent spy. Taking his hand, she asks him not to think about it, because there is nothing bad in talking to Madame. He shouldn't be afraid of such meetings and hide it, as if the commander's visit could ruin everything. To save time, Renisha intends to start choosing a walking suit right now. The next day, the girl was truly able to surprise everyone who saw her outfit. In this form, she looks more like an Oriental princess before a traditional holiday. However, this dress and other attire of an Oriental beauty really suit her. Cassius thinks so too, although he didn't quite expect that this particular image would be chosen. Of course, there must be a prince next to the Oriental beauty, otherwise it will not be convincing. Just in case, the maid warns that there are other things in the wardrobe. Linda asks to keep her thoughts to herself, otherwise these words may hurt the lady. Can't you see how much respect and awe Cassius has for his wife? When young people value this, the opinions of others cease to matter. Linda only wants the girl to be happy, she deserves it. So Jane had better go down and help the others get ready for their walk into town. Renisha should not suffer anymore. This girl has already had to endure enough suffering. Linda still remembers those moments of shame when the emperor drove her out of the palace. But today it becomes clear that Renisha does not regret the dissolution of her marriage with His Majesty. With Sir Cassius by her side for the first time in many years, she feels needed and deeply loved. True, the Duchess's former curiosity has not disappeared, but rather the opposite. Once at the market, she can't find a place for herself, so much is she attracted by the festive fair. Unfortunately, everywhere is full of people and there is a huge queue even next to small tents. Since they are here, she asks the gentleman to hurry and take at least one seat. It's a little unusual that she's willing to stand at the end of a huge line for ordinary things. She had never done this before, but today she wants to feel part of this city. The girl admits that in her distant childhood she hardly ever went beyond the mansion. As the child of a ducal family, Renisha was an eyesore to many. In order not to burden her bodyguards with extra work, she did not go outside, explaining this by simple laziness. Then she married the emperor, and what happened next, Cassius knows better than many others. If you think back, she only knows 3 places, as if the whole world consisted of only them. The parental home and the imperial palace are the top 2 places. Interrupting her, Cassius reminds her that the 3rd place was his mansion, which also became a home. A second later, he realizes that he shouldn't have spoken about it so solemnly. After Renishi's confession, he completely changes his mind, suggesting that they go around all the stalls in the market. Until they visit every merchant, a walk through the city center will be considered incomplete. It's amazing to see how some men change their initial decision. However, she is quite happy with this decision, especially if he did it for his wife. A few minutes later, the girl feels something wet and cold on her hand. Rain always ruins plans, and it's a shame that it happened on such an important day. Incredibly, not only was Renisha visiting the market for the first time, but she had also never walked in the rain. While this would be a problem for others, there is not a trace of sadness in the Duchess's eyes. On the contrary, she wants to feel nature and finally understand that she is still alive. Drops one after another touch the palm, as if someone were sending them from heaven to earth. And yet, without an umbrella, the Duchess of Renisha could end the day with a high temperature. Usually, it is the girl who thinks in advance about taking an umbrella on a walk. Thanks to Cassius, today she experiences something special that cannot be described in words. Probably, looking at this girl, you begin to understand what true happiness is. However, not everyone likes to watch other people's happiness, even while sitting in a warm carriage. Looking at the 2 lovers from afar, Canaria begins to envy her recent rival. She is sure that with such behavior the former empress is forgetting about decency. The main thing is how Lexus looks at it. He clearly feels something similar. Canaria asks you to ignore this strange couple. They will soon be on the front page of the newspapers. The Duchess's name is already tarnished, and now she can't wash away the shame. It is known that they will soon leave for the lands that Lexus recently granted, but judging by his appearance, Lexus understands something important that has always escaped notice before. There's nothing special about Renisha's new boyfriend, so why is she looking at him like that? As a married couple, Lexus had never seen his wife look like that. If Renisha had looked at him with the same eyes even once, this divorce might not have happened. Lexus demands not to touch him. He is not inclined to romantic communication. Besides, right now he wants to see the former empress for a short conversation. Canaria must not interfere, otherwise she might feel the emperor's wrath. After a short time, the carriage arrives at the 4th place, which Renisha visits for the first time. Before the Hillshane lands were taken as dowry, they belonged to her. By the will of fate, she again becomes the mistress of this place and has the right to decide how to manage it. She never saw the locals, although they would certainly recognize the face of the former empress. The day of arrival finally arrived. Cassius really fulfilled his promise. Opening the carriage door, he suggests not to be afraid of the new and just feel like a mistress. With his help, they will be able to create a new life here, and soon Hillshane will change forever. This is exactly what Renisha herself wanted, having a ready-made plan for improving the local lands. She timidly offers her hand, feeling the masculine confidence of Commander Cassius. Thus, from this day on, a new life begins, far from the Emperor and his vile wife. I must say, the castle turned out to be quite large, as if she were in a palace again. The ladies of the court, who went with Renisha, are already ready to fulfill the will of the mistress. At this point, she notices that Linda is worried about something, as if she doesn't like the house. She is sure that if urgent repairs are not carried out, the building will collapse on their heads. However, Isabella is not worried about this at all, feeling completely calm. She really likes the new house. It really does look like a palace. In addition, mice and birds live in the castle, and she personally saw a huge deer. Renisha advises her assistant to follow her niece's example and not give up too soon. It would be better if she walked around the castle herself, taking Isabella with her. As expected, she receives her first assignment as soon as she arrives at her new location. Renisha admits that she understands her assistant's mood perfectly, knowing about her noble origin. However, Linda's help is needed now, especially after everything that happened. The fact that they got there without incident is truly down to Linda. Someday her efforts will be rewarded, because the Duchess never forgets the help provided. After waiting for Cassius, the girl tells him about the poor condition of the castle, which is completely unsuitable for living. It feels like nothing can be repaired here, and that we need to buy another house. However, Renisha has a better idea, if only the commander completely trusts his wife. He admits that he will remain faithful to her, even standing on the edge of a cliff and seeing an abyss before him. She may be the only person he can trust with his own life. Such confessions should be said more often if he wants to lift Renisha's spirits. I have never experienced such a romantic atmosphere with Cassius. Moreover, with her husband's support, she will not give in to Lexus and will not return to her past life. This man hoped that, having moved to Hillshine, the newlyweds would die here. For this reason, the Emperor gave the crumbling castle as a new home. But even if they took away her title of Empress, they couldn't take away the Lotera family name. The severed heads of the parents once became a gift from the Emperor to his wife. Then he asked not to be sad about this, because the Duke and Duchess sacrificed themselves for the whole country. In his eyes, the death of these people is the most noble act in the entire history of the Empire. However, if it weren't for that damn bastard, my parents would still be alive. Noticing that Renishin is doing well, the commander suggests that they rest a little after the move. The girl is sure that this is unnecessary now, because there are too many things to do before the evening. With her carefree appearance, she resembles a cute little puppy who has just entered a new home. Still, the renovation really does need to be done, otherwise Linda and the other maids won't leave her alone. First, workers need to be hired, and the delivery of building materials should be entrusted to those who are weaker. It would be nice to increase the number of residents because few people live in Hillshine. She is convinced that lands without people are just dead lands with no future. After some thought, Cassius decides to offer his soldiers as workers. If he wants to bring all the knights at once, it is better to entrust this work to Therion. The assistant has long established himself as a capable and quite intelligent guy. The main problem is that these people know too little about Hillshine. Of course, you can learn everything gradually, but this requires a good teacher. Cassius is unable to understand what is special about these lands that the workers should know about. A little later, he himself will find out about everything, but now his wife suggests going to the village. She will wait for his return at the castle, hoping that the trip will not last long. Before leaving, the commander asks us to dress warmer, as the local climate is different from the capital's. Her hands are already too cold, as if she had spent the whole day in the cold. As usual, the Duchess promises to improve by finding warm mittens among her things. He probably doesn't understand how hot the fire is in this girl's heart. Someday the truth will be revealed, but for now we must preserve this flame for one revenge that burns everything.